Greetings everyone, this is Wizardium. Prepare yourselves for what if James and Lily survived and raised Harry with Hermione as twins. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more. Let's begin. Chapter 1. The house that magic built the garden exploded. Not dramatically, not in the way that left scorch marks on the fence or sent Mrs. Fig's cat bolting down the lane, but in the small, specific way that meant one of the twins had lost their temper again. A cluster of garden gnomes launched themselves off the compost heap in sheer self-preservation, one of them clipping the weather vane on its way out and sending it spinning. A rosebush, Lily's favorite, the stubborn climbing one that had survived 2 mild hexes and 1 full-scale argument about Quidditch practice schedules, shed all its petals at once in a pink cascade that drifted lazily across the lawn. Harry Potter stood in the middle of the garden with his hands at his sides and his jaw set and said nothing. Hermione Potter stood 3 meters away, wand already back in her pocket, and said, "Again, I've done it 6 times. You've attempted it 6 times, you haven't done it once." James Potter, who had been sitting on the back step with a cup of tea and the reasonable intention of watching without interfering for at least another 5 minutes, made a sound that was technically a cough but was really a laugh. "Dad," Harry's voice was flat, "I didn't say anything. You made the noise. I was coughing. You never cough." James took a peaceful sip of his tea. "The disillusionment charm," he said pleasantly, "is a 7th-year spell. The fact that you're both attempting it at age 10, while arguing about the methodology, is either impressive or concerning, and I genuinely haven't decided which. It's an advanced concealment charm and it's based on the same principle as a bedazzlement hex, which Harry can already do," Hermione said. She had the tone she always got when explaining something, not impatient exactly, but brisk, like the explanation was a door she was holding open and she didn't want to be left holding it for long. "The only difference is duration and scope. If he could just relax his—" "I'm relaxed," Harry said. "You're gripping your wand like it owes you money. I'm gripping my wand like I'm trying to do a 7th-year spell." The back door opened. Lily Potter emerged with her own tea, a stack of books tucked under one arm, and the particular expression of a woman who had already had a long morning before the morning had properly started. She was still in her dressing gown, the green one, worn soft at the elbows, with her hair pulled back in a way that meant she'd been working since before anyone else woke up. She looked at the scattered petals, at the spinning weather vane, at the gnome that was still hanging from the gate, apparently trying to unionize with the others in the hedgerow. "The disillusionment charm?" she asked. "6th time," James confirmed. "7th," Hermione corrected. "Attempted," Harry muttered. Lily set her books down on the garden table and dropped into the chair beside James. She looked at Harry for a moment with that quiet, particular attention she had, the kind that made you feel like she was reading not just your face but the sentence underneath it. "Show me," she said. Harry straightened slightly. He rolled his wand once in his fingers, a habit he'd had since he was small, his version of a breath before a dive, and then cast the charm. Evanesco corpus, the incantation silent the way James had taught them, and he felt the magic pull through him and scatter at the edges like water hitting a warm surface. The tips of his fingers went slightly translucent. The rest of him remained thoroughly visible. Lily got up. She walked around Harry twice in a slow circle with the look she usually reserved for complex potions and suspicious ministry correspondence. She didn't touch him, just looked, and then she held up her hand and cast the same charm on herself, wand loose, movement minimal, and disappeared from the shoulders up. The floating collar and dressing gown collar that remained were deeply unsettling. "You're trying to push the magic outward," her disembodied voice said, "like you're coating yourself in it. Don't do that. It's not a layer, it's a collapse. You're convincing the light to stop caring about you." Harry frowned. "That doesn't make sense." "It doesn't have to make sense, it has to feel true." Lily reappeared hair first. "You do it when you want the magic to behave, try it when you want it to agree with you." A beat of silence. Harry tried again. For a fraction of a second, barely long enough to count, barely long enough for the light to notice, he vanished. Hermione made a sound that was either a gasp or a very small cheer, suppressed immediately into professional composure. James punched the air. Harry reappeared looking slightly startled, like a boy who jumped off a ledge and was surprised to find he hadn't fallen. "There," Lily said, and went back to her tea and her books. The Potter house at Godric's Hollow was not the house it had been. The original building, the one that had stood through the attack, the one Voldemort's curse had torn a hole through, had been rebuilt in the months after, mostly by James's own hands, and an ugly amount of structural repair charms that Sirius had found somewhere inadvisable. It was larger now, leaning slightly to the left in a way that gave it character rather than concern, with a bay window in the kitchen that Lily had insisted on, and a library that had consumed what was originally the second-best bedroom and shown no signs of stopping. The garden was big enough for Quidditch practice of the low-altitude variety, which James had deemed more important than a vegetable patch, a decision that still came up occasionally when Lily was trying to find the time. It was a house that felt lived in the particular way that magical homes did, not messy exactly but saturated with history. The walls remembered things. The bookshelves weren't entirely alphabetical because Lily arranged books by theme and James by vibe, a system he had explained twice to Hermione and which she had politely declined to adopt. There was a burn mark on the kitchen ceiling from an early experiment Harry had conducted at age 6, involving a bluebell flame and a deeply misguided theory about permanent light sources. It remained because Lily had looked at it for a long time when she found it, and then simply said she liked it. Hermione had never set a ceiling on fire, but she had once, at age 7, accidentally rewritten 3 pages of James's aura report in ancient runes while reading over his shoulder. James had framed the original and put it in his office. The ministry had received a clean copy, and no one had mentioned it. Breakfast was eggs and toast, and the particular organized chaos of the Potter family at full strength, which meant James was standing at the stove talking to it encouragingly. Lily was reading with her elbow on the table and didn't register food unless it appeared directly in front of her, and the twins were in the middle of a conversation that had started in the garden and hadn't paused for location changes. "The thing is," Hermione said, spreading jam with one hand while the other traced a rune pattern on the tablecloth, not drawing, just feeling, "the theory behind it works for any concealment-based magic, which means you could probably apply the same principle to the Fidelius charm." "The Fidelius charm is 100 times more complicated," Harry said. "Obviously, but the principle doesn't matter if the execution is impossible." "Nothing is impossible, it's just a question of eggs," James announced, setting a plate down between them with the authority of a man inserting himself into a conversation before it became a seminar. Harry took his plate. Hermione took her plate. The conversation paused by roughly 30 seconds. "Mum," Harry said, "what are you reading?" Lily didn't look up. "Family Archive." "Which one?" A pause, the kind that was just slightly too deliberate. "Old one," she said. James at the stove turned to look at her with a very specific expression, the one that meant he knew something was happening and was deciding whether to acknowledge it. Lily kept her eyes on the pages. James turned back to his own eggs. The twins exchanged a look. They had a whole dictionary of looks, developed over 10 years of shared bedrooms and shared lessons, and the kind of proximity that meant you learned to read someone's face like a second language. This one said, "Something is happening and we're not being told about it." Hermione filed it away. Harry ate his eggs. It was a Tuesday in August, the kind of still, warm morning that felt like the last of summer making an argument for itself before autumn arrived. Through the kitchen window, the garden had gone quiet now that the gnomes had fled, and the light was doing something nice across the rosebush. One surviving petal. Lily noticed it and smiled very slightly before she could stop herself. The owl arrived at 9:47. It wasn't Hedwig. Harry's snowy owl was in the owlery at the end of the garden, asleep and opinionated about being disturbed before noon. This was a large, officious barn owl with a Hogwarts seal on both letters it was carrying, and it landed on the kitchen table with the absolute conviction of a bird that had never been told it couldn't, stepping directly on Lily's archive and regarding the Potter family with complete indifference. Silence. The kind that happens when a room full of people all realize they've been waiting for something and it has just arrived. The letters were addressed in the same green ink, the same formal script, Miss Hermione J. Potter and Mr. Harry J. Potter. Hermione picked hers up, turned it over, looked at it the way she looked at things she already understood but wanted to be sure of. Harry just held his loosely like he'd expected it to be heavier. "Well," James said. He cleared his throat. "Right." "Open them," Lily said, and her voice was perfectly level, which meant she was feeling something she wasn't going to express until later when she thought no one was listening. The seal broke with a soft sound that might have been magic or might just have been wax. Inside, the acceptance letter, the supply list, the notice about Diagon Alley, the small note about owls and familiars, and the restriction on first-year students bringing their own broomstick. "That restriction," Harry said, reading ahead, "doesn't say anything about using a broomstick. It says you can't bring one," Hermione said. "Exactly, Harry, I'm just reading the letter." "You're reading the letter with your scheming face." "I don't have a scheming face." "You have exactly a scheming face. Dad has the same one. It's genetic." James pointed at himself with his fork. "Proud of that." Lily stood up. She folded the archive she'd been reading and tucked it under her arm, and for a moment she was standing at the kitchen table holding a stack of old parchment, and 2 Hogwarts letters were on the table between her children, and the light from the bay window was doing something to her face that James watched very carefully without saying anything. Then she smiled, a real one, the kind that started in her eyes, and said, "We should make a list. There's a lot to get." The archive went back to the library. Lily carried it upstairs while the twins started annotating their supply lists in the kitchen, Hermione systematically, Harry enthusiastically, and James refilled the kettle and pretended not to watch the door she'd gone through. He gave it 4 minutes. Then he followed her. The library was Lily's real office, more than the actual office downstairs which she used for ministry correspondence and research she was being paid to do. This was where she kept the work she cared about, the spellwork theory, the ancient texts on sacrificial magic, the 3 different translations of the same obscure runic manuscript she'd been comparing for 8 years. The shelves reached the ceiling and she'd never bothered with a ladder because she could summon anything she needed, and the result was a room that looked like it was always slightly in motion, books drifting back to wrong places and being corrected by the room's own enchantments. She was standing at the central table with the archive open again, not reading, just looking at a specific page. "Lily," I found something. James came to stand beside her. He looked at the page, old parchment, brittle at the edges, written in the formal wizarding script of the early 20th century, and then he looked at Lily's face instead because he could read her face better than he could read most documents. How bad? It's not bad. She paused. It's another pause, a longer one. James, do you remember the night it happened? The night he came to the house? I don't think about it if I can avoid it. You went down first. He hit you with the full body bind before you could get your wand up, and then he went upstairs to where I was with Harry. She said it matter-of-factly, the way she said all the hardest things, like neutrality was a kindness she could offer the memory. And I did the sacrificial magic. I didn't cast anything, I just refused, chose death. You know what that does? It left a protection in Harry, in the blood, yes, in Harry. She looked at the page. And then Voldemort's curse rebounded, and there was this tear, James, in the spell structure. The sacrificial magic had created this gap in the fabric of things, this echo of the protection, and something came through it. James was very still. Something, he said. Lily's finger rested on the page. Diagram, old ink, faded, showing lines of magical force converging and then fragmenting and then reforming in a pattern that shouldn't have been geometrically possible. I always told myself that Hermione arrived because she was meant to, Lily said. That some magic brought her to us because she was ours, because it was right. And I do believe that, James, she is absolutely, completely ours. I'm not questioning that for 1 second, Lily. She was someone else's child. The words were quiet, not broken, just honest. She was a little girl in another family, and my magic pulled her out of it and brought her here. She was 11 months old, and she came through a tear in the fabric of magical cause and effect and appeared in the ruins of our house because my sacrificial magic needed somewhere to go, and she resonated with it. Her magical signature matched the frequency of the protective spell. James looked at the diagram for a long moment. Outside the library window, they could hear the twins, Harry's voice and then Hermione's, overlapping, arguing about whether second Transfiguration textbook was necessary or simply optimal. She doesn't know, James said. She doesn't know. We have to tell her. I know, not everything at once, not before Hogwarts. No, Lily closed the archive, pressed her hand flat on the cover. But James, there's more. There's a page about the prophecy, the original prophecy record from the Ministry archive. I requested a copy through Dumbledore 2 months ago, and it mentions 2 children. James's face changed. It says, Lily continued with the precision of someone who had read something enough times to recite it exactly, the one with the power to vanquish the Dark Lord approaches, born as the 7th month dies, marked as his equal, a star with a twin flame, born of sacrifice, who knows him from the inside. Silence. A twin flame, James repeated, born of sacrifice. She came through a sacrificial spell, James. She is the twin flame. She's always been part of this. Below them, Hermione laughed at something Harry said, a bright, real laugh, the unguarded kind, and James and Lily stood in the library with the archive between them and the sound of it, and neither of them said anything for a long time. Diagon Alley was the same as it had always been and completely different than it had been 11 years ago. The way all places are when you return to them changed rather than the place itself. The bustle was familiar, the smell of ink and cauldron smoke and something fried from a stall near the entrance, but the wait was different for James and Lily, walking it with 2 children who were going to Hogwarts in 3 weeks. The twins, however, did not appear to feel the weight at all. Hermione had the supply list in one hand and a mental map of Diagon Alley in the other. She had studied the layout from a guidebook Lily had lent her and organized the errands by geographic efficiency, which Harry had looked at and immediately begun suggesting improvised detours. They had compromised, which in Potter twin language meant Hermione had agreed to 1 detour if Harry agreed to Madame Malkin's without complaint. Harry had agreed. He was already regretting it. Stand still, the measuring tape said, or implied, because it was the kind of measuring tape that had its own opinions and wasn't shy about them. I am standing still, Harry said through gritted teeth. You are swaying slightly to the left, Hermione said from the chair she was occupying while her robes were already done, sitting with a book she'd picked up in flourish and blots on the way in. I'm not swaying, the tape is aggressive. The tape is measuring. The tape has an attitude. Harry, Hermione. She looked up. I'm not asking you to enjoy it. I'm asking you to allow it to happen. Philosophically, I understand that. Physically, the tape just went somewhere unexpected. Madame Malkin's assistant, a young witch who had been doing this for 6 weeks and had been promised it was a calm job, moved the tape away from the area in question without comment. James, standing by the door with his arms folded, and the expression of a man who had passed through Madame Malkin's twice himself in the last half hour, said, Lily, remind me why we split up. Because you and I both need new dress robes and the children needed school robes and there are only so many hours before the wand appointment, Lily said without looking up from her own list. I'm just saying we could have done this differently. You suggested we let them do Ollivanders without us. I suggested they were old enough. They're 10, nearly 11. Ollivander gives people quite a lot of information about themselves and some of it is confronting. Do you remember what he told you? James opened his mouth, closed it again. Right, Lily said pleasantly. Harry's robes were finished. He stepped down from the platform with the air of a prisoner of war being released and came to stand beside Hermione, looking over her shoulder at the book. What's that? Intermediate Spellcasting Theory and the Mechanics of Intent. That's not a first-year book. No, it's not. We haven't even started first year yet. Correct, that's why it says intermediate. She closed it, marked the page with her finger. I thought I might get ahead. Harry looked at his parents. James shrugged with the comfortable helplessness of a man who had accepted this about his daughter years ago. Lily was adding the book to the list of things to be purchased. Ollivander's was at the end of the afternoon. The light was changing by then, later August light, the low golden kind that made everything look slightly more significant than it was, and the shop was the same as it had always been, which was to say dim and full of something that felt like held breath. Mr. Ollivander was exactly what he looked like, a man who had been measuring magical potential for so long that he'd started to seem like part of the inventory. He looked at Harry and Hermione with those pale, luminous eyes and said nothing for a moment that extended well past comfortable. Mr. Potter, he said at last, I've been waiting. Everyone says that, Harry said, and yet somehow it's always a bit unsettling. Ollivander's thin mouth did something that wasn't quite a smile. Miss Potter. He transferred his gaze to Hermione, held it there slightly longer. You're an interesting case. I try not to be, Hermione said. I doubt that very much. He tilted his head. Let's begin. The process took longer than expected. Harry went through 14 wands before a holly wand with a phoenix feather core made a sound like wind through open space and sent silver sparks in spiraling loops around the ceiling. Ollivander looked at it for a long moment, then at James and said, Curious, very curious. You're going to say something cryptic, Harry predicted. The brother wand, Ollivander said, to the one that gave you that scar made its last owner a great and terrible wizard. Holly and phoenix feather, it is a wand for a life of significance, Mr. Potter. I wonder which kind of significance you'll choose. The one where I get to decide, Harry said. Ollivander looked at him with something that might have been approval. Good answer. Hermione's wand was vine wood with a dragon heartstring core 9 3/4 inches flexible, and when she held it the warmth that rolled off it was not the crackling spectacular warmth of Harry's wand but something steadier, longer burning. She held it and the room didn't explode with sparks. The room went very still and then every loose piece of parchment on Ollivander's shelves lifted slightly as though the air had drawn a breath. Vine, Ollivander said quietly, the wand of purpose. It chooses those who have a great cause. A pause. It rarely chooses children. I'm told I'm an unusual case, Hermione said, with exactly the same deadpan delivery she'd used 10 minutes ago. This time Ollivander actually smiled. They ate dinner in the leaky cauldron because it was tradition. James had made it tradition the first time he'd brought Harry to Diagon Alley as a toddler, and it had solidified into the kind of family ritual that felt less like choice than gravity. The same corner booth. Butterbeer for the children, fire whiskey for James, and Lily always had the soup because Lily always had the soup. The twins were full of the particular loud energy of children who have had a day full of new things and are now processing it all at once, over the table, at a volume that was just within acceptable bounds for a public establishment. Harry was describing the wand process in detail, 14 wands, 14, with the emphasis of someone who has survived a long ordeal, while Hermione had pulled out a new copy of Intermediate Spellcasting Theory again and was eating soup with one hand. James watched them. He watched Hermione turn a page without looking up, her soup spoon operating on independent authority, and he thought about a page in an archive and a line about twin flames, and he looked at his wife. Lily was watching Hermione too. Mum, Harry said between stories, why does Ollivander know about the wand that you know, the one? Voldemort's wand, Lily said, clearly the way she always said it because she taught them both early that fear of a name was a bad habit to let develop. Harry nodded. Why does Ollivander know about it? Because Ollivander made it. He made every wand we've mentioned today. A pause. He made Voldemort's wand the same way he made yours. He makes wands for anyone who comes to him. He doesn't make moral judgments about the customers. That's a bit troubling. That's wandcraft. She pulled a piece of bread apart. The magic doesn't know what it'll be used for. That's always the person's choice. Hermione looked up from her book. She had been listening the way she always listened when she appeared to be doing something else completely. Do you think Voldemort will come back? The question was delivered with the same tone she used for everything, direct, measured, not afraid of the thing she was asking. It was one of the things that had always been simultaneously her greatest quality and the thing that occasionally stopped a conversation cold. James set down his fire whiskey. Lily said, yes, not maybe, not we don't know. Just yes, quiet and certain, because her children were going to Hogwarts in 3 weeks and they were going to be in the same building as a world that would not wait for them to be ready, and she had made a decision a long time ago about the kind of parents she and James were going to be. He lost too much that night to come back quickly, she continued. And people who know about these things, Dumbledore, some others, are watching for the signs, but yes, eventually, probably. Harry digested this. Right, he said. Right, Hermione agreed. So what do we do? Harry asked. Learn everything you can, James said. Get as good as you can possibly get, make good friends who you trust, and then when the time comes, he looked at both of them, you won't need us to tell you what to do, you'll already know. Hermione looked at her father, her dad, this man she'd known for all of her life, who had taught her to cast her first successful spell at 4 and read her spellwork theory at bedtime and absolutely lost his mind with pride the first time she'd cast a non-verbal charm at age 8, and she felt something settle in her chest like the last piece of a large and complicated puzzle slotting home. Can we train over the summer? She asked. Properly, I mean not just the garden. Can we start on defensive magic? Lily and James exchanged a look. Monday morning, James said. 6 a.m. Dad, Harry said. 6 a.m., James repeated pleasantly sharp. Late that night after the twins were in bed after Harry had fallen asleep mid-sentence about Quidditch strategies and Hermione had read for another hour before Lily came in to firmly take the book, the house settled into its particular quiet. James was in the library. He didn't know why he'd come up here instead of going to bed, but he was standing at the window with the archive on the table behind him, not looking at it, looking at the garden instead. The gnomes had come back. One of them was sitting on the fence post in the dark, which was, he didn't know what that was. Gnomes weren't usually contemplative. Lily came in. She was carrying the last of the evening tea and she handed him a cup without comment and stood beside him at the window. She's going to find out, he said. Not from us. Eventually someone will say something or she'll find something in the archive herself or, I know. We should tell her soon. I know, James. She's strong enough. She's been strong enough for years. I know. Lily leaned her head against his shoulder. I want to give her the summer, one more summer where she's just ours, completely and uncomplicated. And then, she exhaled, then we tell her everything, before term starts. Before Hogwarts gives the world a chance to tell her first. Below them, the gnome on the fence post appeared to reach a conclusion about something and jumped down into the garden. The night was still and warm. She's ours, James said, not a question. She's ours, Lily agreed. Whatever else is true, that is the truest thing. They stood there a while longer. The archive sat closed on the table. The prophecy record, a star with a twin flame, was inside it, folded carefully in Lily's handwriting. The night pressed against the windows and didn't demand anything from anyone, and the Potter house held its inhabitants as houses do when they're built right, with absolute conviction. In the room down the hall, Hermione was not asleep. She was lying in the dark looking at the ceiling, listening to the house settle around her, and she was thinking about a word she'd found 3 weeks ago in an old book in the back section of the library that her parents never explicitly told her not to look at but that she'd noticed had a faint dust charm on the shelves that she'd broken without meaning to. The word was echo. It was written in a very specific magical context, not echo as in sound, but echo as in a response to a force. A second vibration, a resonance. She thought about the wand Ollivander had given her and how it had gone still rather than explosive, how the air in the room had pulled inward. She thought about the way magic had always felt to her familiar, like something she'd done before, like remembering rather than learning. She thought about the very occasional dream she had of a different ceiling, a different dark, a smell like antiseptic and something baking and a brown-haired woman reading in a chair. She thought, I am 11 months old and I'm in the ruins of a house that isn't mine and something in the magic is calling me home. She thought, home got there first. And then she closed her eyes and slept because she was 10 years old and she had excellent emotional regulation for someone who would be 11 in September, and the gnome in the garden had stopped whatever philosophical crisis it was having and the night was quiet. The Potter house breathed around her. It had never once in 10 years let her feel anything but certain that she belonged. The morning of September 1st arrived with the specific violence of a morning that has been building significance for weeks. Lily made a breakfast that nobody had much appetite for. James carried trunks down the stairs with the magical efficiency of someone who had been dreading this morning since July and had decided to manage it through logistical competence. Hedwig watched the proceedings from her perch with the profound disdain of an owl who had been packed and unpacked twice already this week. On the front step with the taxis ordered and the trunks loaded and the September morning sharp and clear around them, Lily gathered her children into a hug that lasted exactly as long as it needed to and no longer, and she pressed her mouth to each of their foreheads in turn. Brilliant and brave and absolutely yourselves, she said. That's all you ever have to be. James put his arms around all three of them from behind and said from somewhere above their heads, and don't blow anything up before December, as a personal favor. I make no promises, Harry said, muffled. Noted. Hermione, arms around her mother, her face pressed briefly against Lily's shoulder, felt the particular weight of the morning settle around her like a cloak, not heavy exactly, more like the feeling of starting a very long, very important book, the first sentence already read. The rest of it waiting. She took a breath, she let go. Chapter 2, Platform 9, and the weight of a name. The train was already breathing steam when they arrived. King's Cross at 11 o'clock on September 1st was its own particular kind of chaos, Muggle travelers with their sensible luggage and their complete indifference to magic moving alongside families who were barely containing the visible evidence of an entirely different world. A woman in a pointed hat had concealed it under beret and was not doing a convincing job. Two red-haired boys were arguing at full volume about whether Toad could survive a journey in a coat pocket, and their mother, a round-faced witch with a magnificent expression of strained patience, was herding them through the barrier at Platform 9, and 3/4 with the practiced authority of someone who had done this many times before. Harry watched the red-haired family melt through the barrier one by one and said, "Does it ever stop being strange, going through a wall?" "It's not actually a wall," Hermione said, managing her trolley with one hand while reading the last 3 pages of intermediate spellcasting theory with the other. "It's a modified permeability enchantment. The barrier only has mass if you approach it with doubt. That's deeply philosophical for 9:53 in the morning." It's just physics. It's not just physics, it's magical physics, which is, functionally the same thing with different variables. Harry considered arguing, decided not to. He was learning slowly when the argument was winnable. James went first, still did it at a run, still looked delighted by it, which was the sort of thing that explained a lot about him. And then Lily, and then the trolleys were maneuvered through and they were on the other side, and the Scarlet steam engine was there, enormous and vivid and smelling of coal and metal and something else underneath that was harder to name. Magic maybe, or possibility, or just the accumulated weight of decades of children leaving home. The platform was loud and full. Owls disagreed with being in cages. Cats sat in carriers with the dignity of creatures who were tolerating this. A pair of twins, red-haired, clearly the arguing pair from the barrier, now joined by a third, identical to the second, were making faces at someone through a carriage window. Their mother caught them at it and the reprimand was swift and cheerfully ignored. Potter. The voice was male, enthusiastic, and accompanied by Sirius Black appearing from somewhere in the crowd, with the confidence of a man who had decided the crowd should part for him rather than the other way around, and who had been correct about this his entire life. He was wearing a leather jacket over wizarding robes in a way that shouldn't have worked and somehow did, and beside him, carrying 2 cups of something hot and looking like he'd been told they were meeting here 5 minutes ago and still managed to be late, was Remus Lupin. Harry lit up in a way that was completely unguarded, that particular version of happy that only happens with people you've known your whole life. Sirius picked him up. Harry protested. He was nearly 11 and this was undignified, and Sirius put him down immediately and then did the same to Hermione, who protested even more and fixed her hair with sharp precision and then hugged him properly, which was what they both wanted. "You look older," Sirius told Harry. "I am older, that's how time works." Devastating. Sirius looked at James. "They're going to be absolutely menaces." "That's the goal," James said, and shook Remus's hand and then pulled him into a hug that Remus accepted with the careful warmth of a man who had never quite gotten comfortable with easy affection but who was working on it. Remus looked at the twins. There was something in his face, something layered and not entirely present, a kind of looking at a future that was moving too fast. "Hogwarts," he said, and the word carried more freight than one word should be able to. "Don't get emotional, Moony," Sirius said. "I'm not emotional. You've got the face. I don't have a face. The face where you're thinking about 17 complicated things at once and one of them is making you sad." Remus looked at the twins again, then at James, then deliberately at a point above everyone's heads. "I'm simply noting that it's a significant morning." "Noted," James said, and there was something between them then, old grief, old love, the specific weight of a group of people who had survived something together and were still sometimes surprised to be standing here on a train platform in the ordinary light of an ordinary morning. The whistle blew 1 minute. Lily stepped forward. She put her hands on Harry's face first, briefly, cupping it, and said nothing because she'd already said what she needed to say that morning. Harry leaned into it for exactly 1 second and then straightened, and she let go. She turned to Hermione, and Hermione saw it, the thing behind her mother's eyes, the complicated thing she'd been carrying since Diagon Alley, the thing that lived in the archive in the library that Hermione hadn't been invited to look at. "Mum," she said quietly. "When you get back for Christmas," Lily said, "we're going to have a long talk about a lot of things. Things I should have explained already and didn't because," she stopped, "because I was being selfish, because I wanted more time." "More time for what?" Lily just smiled and kissed her forehead. "Write to me every week." The whistle blew again, sharp and final. Harry grabbed Hermione's wrist. "Come on." They ran. The Hogwarts Express operated on a logic of its own, not quite British Rail, not quite magical transportation, but something that managed to be both simultaneously and without apology. The corridors were narrow and loud, trunks stacked everywhere, owls registering displeasure through the ventilation, and the particular social energy of several hundred children sorted by age and anxiety finding their people. Harry and Hermione found a compartment about 2/3 down the train, not the first one, because the first ones filled fastest with people who needed to be seen, and not the last ones either, because those tended to collect the people who needed not to be found. The middle was comfortable anonymity. They got approximately 4 minutes of it. The door slid open and a round-faced boy with a toad in his cupped hands appeared in the doorway, looking at the toad rather than them, and said to the toad, "I told you this was a bad idea," before looking up and registering the compartment's occupants. He was solidly built, soft-featured, with the particular expression of someone who had been anxious so recently and so thoroughly that it had settled into a kind of default state he no longer bothered fighting. His robes were slightly too big. He had a small smear of ink on his wrist. "Sorry," he said. Can I sit down?" Hermione said, because she'd been watching him stand in the doorway long enough. He sat. The toad sat with him, apparently satisfied with the arrangement. "Neville Longbottom," he said. "The toad is Trevor, he keeps escaping." "Harry Potter." Neville blinked. He did the thing, the half-second recalibration that Harry had learned to recognize, the moment when someone mapped the name onto the scar and the history and the whole complicated architecture of what Potter meant in the wizarding world. But Neville Longbottom did something interesting with it. He filed it, and then he just said, "Hermione, Hermione Potter." Another blink. I didn't know. I mean, I knew James and Lily Potter had children, but I didn't. It's fine, Hermione said. Most people don't know there are two of us. We don't come up in the history books much. A pause. Yet, Harry looked at her. She was looking at Trevor the Toad. Your parents, Neville said carefully. They were in the order with mine. With yours, Harry confirmed. He knew the Longbottoms the way you knew things that had happened before you were born but mattered. Frank and Alice, Aurors, the other family Voldemort had considered for the prophecy. The ones who'd survived Voldemort only to be destroyed by his followers after. The ones whose son had grown up with his grandmother and a quietly enormous grief. Something passed across Neville's face, then it settled. Gran says your parents were brilliant, he said simply. Gran's right, Harry said, and meant it. Door slid open again. This time the boy who appeared had red hair, a long nose, and the easy confidence of someone who moved through the world as though it generally made sense, but who was currently holding a slightly battered chocolate frog card between two fingers with the suspicious air of someone who'd been robbed. Someone in the corridor nicked my Bertie Bott's, he announced to the compartment generally. Half a bag gone. That's not our corridor, Harry said. I know, I've just been telling everyone. He looked around the compartment with frank curiosity. Ron Weasley, can I sit here? My brothers have taken over one compartment and they'll spend the whole trip trying to hex me, and my other brother's friends are all 7th years and that compartment smells terrible. How many brothers? Hermione asked. 5. He pulled a face that conveyed the full complexity of this. Sit down, she said again. Ron sat with the comfortable gratitude of someone who had found the right place. He pulled another chocolate frog from his pocket. Apparently the theft hadn't been complete, and offered it around. Harry took one. Hermione declined. Neville took half. You're Harry Potter, Ron said, not with the recalibration look, but with the easy recognition of someone who'd grown up in a world where this was simply a fact. My dad worked with your dad at the ministry for a bit. He says James Potter once turned Minister Bagnold's desk into a very small rhinoceros and then spent a week pretending to be baffled by it. That sounds right, Harry said. And you're, Ron looked at Hermione with the particular scrutiny of someone recataloguing. His sister, twin, but you don't look. No, Hermione said, we don't. Ron absorbed this the way he absorbed most things, without much visible effort and with a kind of cheerful adaptability that was, Harry was already realizing, probably his defining quality. Right, he said, twins who don't look like twins, good, I'm used to that being the thing that doesn't make sense. Mum says twins are always the thing that doesn't make sense in a family. Hermione picked up her book. Harry watched Ron eat the chocolate frog. He checked the card, set it aside with the air of someone who had seen it before and thought, yes, this one. It was instinct, the same instinct that had always guided him toward people worth trusting, the one his father said came from his mother's side. He couldn't have explained it better than that. The train moved. England rolled past the windows, the city giving way to suburbs and then to fields, and the compartment settled into the easy backhand forth of people who had been strangers 40 minutes ago and were no longer bothering to be. The problem arrived about an hour in. It announced itself with a knock, a sharp proprietary knock, the kind that expected to be answered, and the door slid open to reveal a boy who had clearly decided that arriving with 2 large companions was a statement rather than a coincidence. He was pale, blonde, and had the specific kind of sharp features that looked like they'd been designed to express condescension. His robes were new and they looked it. He looked at Harry first, then at the rest of the compartment. Something in his expression did a quick, dismissive inventory. Potter, he said. That's me, Harry said. Draco Malfoy. He said his own name with the expectation that it would do work for him. I've been looking for your compartment. I thought we should meet properly. He looked at Hermione briefly. Both of you. You found us, Hermione said. What happens now? Draco blinked. He'd clearly prepared for a different sort of reception. Recovered quickly, he was quick, that was evident, and said, I just thought you'd want to meet the right sort of people before we got to school, start on the right footing. The right sort, Harry repeated pleasantly. People who understand how things work. Draco's eyes moved to Ron, and something in his face shifted into a register that was unmistakably inherited, a particular flavor of disdain that came from being taught very carefully who counted and who didn't. Not just any. Ron went still in the way people go still when they've heard something like this before and have gotten good at not reacting to it, which is its own kind of quiet hurt. Harry felt the shift in the compartment the way you feel where the change. Ron Weasley, he said, is sitting in this compartment, so is Neville Longbottom, so is my sister. If the right sort of people don't include any of them, then the right sort of people sound like very dull company. He said it without heat, not a challenge. Just a fact stated at normal volume, with the ease of someone who had decided exactly where he stood about 4 sentences ago. Draco's eyes narrowed. You don't know what you're. I know that my parents fought in a war against people with your family's politics, Harry said, still pleasant. And I know my dad says Lucius Malfoy spent about 6 months after Voldemort fell claiming he'd been under the Imperious Curse, which sure. And I know that you've been in my compartment for 2 minutes and you've already looked at my friend like he's something you've stepped in. Silence. Not hostile silence, just the silence of a room that has heard something it wasn't expecting. Draco's face had done something complicated. Under the condescension there was something else, not hurt exactly, but something in the vicinity. The face of someone who has been handed a script since birth and has just had someone refuse to read opposite him and doesn't know what the scene is supposed to do next. He looked at Hermione. She was watching him with an expression of calm assessment, like she was noting variables. "You're not what I expected," he said to Harry. "Good," Harry said. Another beat. Then Draco turned and left, his companions filing out after him. The door slid shut. Ron let out a slow breath. "Right," he said. "Does that happen a lot?" Neville asked, to nobody specific. "Probably going to get more common," Harry said. "People wanting to figure out which side we're going to be on." "Which side are you on?" Ron asked. Harry looked at Hermione. She had her book open again. She looked up from it briefly and said, "The one that makes sense," and went back to reading. Ron nodded, as though this was the most complete answer possible. "Fair." Draco Malfoy, 2 carriages back, sat with Crabbe and Goyle and thought about the conversation in a way he hadn't planned to. He'd expected Harry Potter to be either awed by the Malfoy name or hostile to it, both of which he'd prepared responses for. The easy confidence, the complete absence of any need to impress or be impressed, was something he didn't have a prepared response for. He looked out the window at the darkening landscape and thought about what his father had said over the summer. "The Potter boy is the key. The Dark Lord will return and Potter will matter to that, and you should be positioned accordingly." He'd said it with the certainty of a man giving instructions about property or politics, as though people were positions on a board. Draco had not said, "What if he doesn't want to be positioned?" He said it now silently to the window, and the window offered no useful response. Hogwarts in the dark was designed to be overwhelming. It succeeded. The boats crossed the lake with the slow inevitability of ceremony, first years packed in fours, the water black and still, the castle rising from the rock above them like something that had grown rather than been built. Harry watched it come up and felt something pull behind his sternum, not nostalgia because he'd never been here, but something that felt like the memory of a memory, as though the castle had heard of him too. Hermione in the boat beside him wasn't watching the castle. She was watching the water, specifically the spot of phosphorescence beneath the surface about 30 meters out that had moved twice since they'd launched. "Giant squid?" Ron asked, following her gaze. "Probably," she said, "or something else. The lake's ecosystem is largely undocumented." "It's Hogwarts," Ron said. "Undocumented is its whole thing." The boats bumped the shore. They filed up the path, up the stairs, into the entranceway, and then they were inside Hogwarts, and it was all stone and torchlight and centuries, and the particular smell of a place that had absorbed so many years of magic that it had become its own kind of creature. Professor McGonagall met them. She was exactly as she looked in every photograph Harry had seen, upright, precise, formidable in the specific way of someone who has nothing to prove, and she looked at the assembled first years with the expression of a woman who had done this many, many times and still took it seriously every time. She paused slightly when she reached Harry, then Hermione. Something moved in her face, careful, controlled, and then she moved on. "She knew my mum," Harry murmured. "She knows everyone," Hermione said. They were led through the entrance hall to wait outside the great hall doors while McGonagall went in, and the group shuffled and whispered and several people tried to look calm and fooled nobody. A ghost drifted through a wall and someone shrieked. "Nearly headless Nick," Ron said knowledgeably. "Gryffindor ghost, my brothers said." The doors opened. The Sorting Hat sang. Hermione had known about the Sorting Hat. She'd read about it, had the process explained by Lily, and had spent a moderate amount of time thinking about which house the hat would choose for her and why, and what the magical methodology of personality-based allocation even meant as a system. She had opinions. The hat, it turned out, also had opinions. She watched the names get called in alphabetical order, the hat placed on each head, and tried to read the pattern. Hannah Abbott went Hufflepuff, immediate and clear. Susan Bones, Hufflepuff. Terry Boot, Ravenclaw. She noted the pauses. The ones where the hat sat longer seemed to weigh something. The ones where the student's face went through something while they waited. Those were the interesting ones. Longbottom Neville. Neville walked up with the air of someone going to the gallows and sat on the stool, and the hat covered his eyes completely. The pause stretched. Harry, sitting in the waiting line, watched it with a frown, not concern but attention. The same attention you paid when something interesting was happening. The hat deliberated for 37 seconds. Hermione counted. Gryffindor. The Gryffindor table erupted. Neville sagged with visible relief and walked to the table on legs that had clearly not been certain he'd be using them again, and he sat down and immediately looked back at the remaining first years with the expression of someone holding a door open. Malfoy, Draco. The hat touched his head, and immediately, before it had properly settled, Slytherin. No deliberation. Draco walked to the Slytherin table with his chin up, but something in the set of his shoulders, something too rigid, too deliberately arranged, said that the certainty everyone else was meant to see was more constructed than given. More names, more houses. Potter, Harry. The hall went quiet. Not completely, it never went completely quiet, but the register dropped sharply, the way sound does when a room is paying attention. Harry walked to the stool with the easy stride that meant he was either genuinely comfortable or had decided to present as such. Hermione knew it was both, and sat down, and the hat was placed on his head. The pause. Harry was still. The hat sat. Hermione watched his face. She was one of the few people who could read the micro-expressions, the slight tension under one eye that meant he was hearing something, The way his hand rested on his knee with the fingers loose rather than gripping, which meant he was engaging rather than resisting. 41 seconds. Gryffindor. The noise was enormous. The Gryffindor table lost its composure entirely. Harry walked to it with the particular expression of someone who had won an argument they hadn't expected to finish so quickly, sat down beside Neville and looked back at the line. Hermione looked back at him. "Your turn," his expression said. She walked to the stool. The hat touched her head, and the voice that spoke inside it was unlike anything she'd expected, not loud, not imperious, just intimate, like a thought happening slightly to the left of her own thoughts. "Ah," it said, "now here's a case. Am I unusual?" She thought back. "More than you know, more than most people in this room know." A pause. "You are brilliant, genuinely, structurally brilliant, not just clever. There's Ravenclaw in you, clearly, and courage in great supply and loyalty that goes bone deep." Another pause. "But there's something else, something that came with you when you arrived." Arrived where? The hat was quiet for a moment in a way that felt like care rather than evasion. "You know the word echo, don't you?" Her breath caught. The hall was very far away. "You are not just a Potter by adoption and love," the hat said gently. "You are a Potter by magic, by the deepest kind of magic, the kind that doesn't choose people so much as recognize what was always true. You were always meant to be here in this family, in this story, a beat, and you will be at the center of things whether you choose it or not. The question is what kind of center. Put me in Gryffindor," she said, not desperate, just clear. "I know," the hat said. And then quieter, something she wouldn't tell anyone for a long time. "You already know more about what you are than you realize. The remembering is still coming." Gryffindor. She walked to the table. Harry moved over to make room for her. She sat down and Neville was grinning and Ron landed beside her 30 seconds later with his own hat moment apparently straightforward. "Weasleys always go Gryffindor, it barely even looked," he said with some pride, and the feast appeared. Harry handed her a roll. She took it. She looked at the candles floating above the great hall and thought about the hat's words, "The remembering is still coming," and felt something at the edge of her mind like a word she already knew in a language she hadn't spoken yet. "You okay?" Harry said quietly. "Fine." The hat said something. "Hats talk, that's the whole thing." "Hermione." She looked at him. At this boy who shared her name, her house, her parents, her whole specific gravity of a life, who she had pushed and argued with and beaten at every spell except the ones that required pure instinct, which she fully planned to correct. She thought, "I choose this. Not because I was placed here, not because magic decided. I choose this because it's true. It told me things I already knew," she said, sort of. Harry studied her for a moment, decided she'd talk about it when she wanted to and let it go. That was the other thing about him, he knew when to push and when to wait, and he almost always got it right. "The food's really good," Ron said to no one with the reverence of a person communing with something spiritual. Neville was feeding Trevor a small piece of lettuce under the table. The feast went on. Professor Dumbledore spoke after the food. He was taller than the portraits and older than his age, which was a thing that happened to people who had been in proximity to very powerful magic for a very long time. He had the eyes that the stories talked about, blue and bright, and looking at things you weren't sure you'd put there to be seen. He welcomed them. He said the usual things, the things that were traditional and true. He mentioned, briefly, that the third-floor corridor on the right-hand side was out of bounds to all students for reasons that would become apparent if they encountered whatever was there and survived. The twins filed that immediately. At the high table, Hermione noticed a man she didn't know, thin, palish, with a turban that seemed heavier than it should have been, and eyes that moved around the room with the restless quality of someone for whom stillness was an effort. He caught her looking and she looked away but kept him in her peripheral vision because the thing she'd noticed wasn't his face. It was his magic. She couldn't fully explain it. She'd never been able to entirely, the way she could sense magical signatures when they were close and strong. But his magic felt wrong the way a word sounds wrong when it's spelled correctly but pronounced badly. Not absent, doubled. She filed that too. "Who's the one with the turban?" she murmured to Harry. "Professor Quirrell," Ron said across the table. He'd heard everything. He had the attentiveness of a youngest sibling. "Defense against the dark arts. My brothers say he was normal last year and came back from a sabbatical a bit." He tilted his hand off. "A sabbatical where?" Hermione asked. "Albania, I think, researching vampires." She looked at Quirrell again. He was eating carefully, methodically, like someone who had to think about it. "Albania," she said. "Yeah." She picked up her pumpkin juice and thought about Albania, and she thought about her mother's voice saying yes to the question about Voldemort coming back, and she thought about the wrongness in Quirrell's magical signature, and she put those three things together with the calm efficiency of someone who did not yet know she was right, but was already very, very close. Gryffindor Tower was loud and warm and exactly what it was supposed to be, exactly what the paintings had suggested and the descriptions had promised, and the word home had always meant when she used it about places that hadn't been her house. A fire in a grate, armchairs that were too soft, portraits of people who had been here before them and were inclined to be opinionated about it. The girls' dormitory had 5 beds with deep red hangings, and the kind of quiet you get when a room holds 4 people all being careful about the noise they're making. Her trunk was at the end of the bed. Hedwig, Harry's owl, who had apparently decided that Hermione's window ledge was preferable to Harry's, was already there, glaring at the unfamiliar room with supreme confidence. Hermione sat on the edge of her bed. She had a parchment out not to write, just to have something under her hands, and she was thinking. The hat had said, "You were always meant to be here." Her mother had said, "We need to talk." The word echo in the back section of the library, the dust charm she'd broken. The remembering is still coming. What was she remembering? She pressed her fingers against the parchment and thought. There was a ceiling, white, different from this one. And a smell like something clean and slightly chemical, and underneath it something warm, something baked. And a woman with brown hair sitting, reading and not seeing her. The memory dissolved when she pushed at it, the way all the real ones did. She put the parchment away. She changed into her pajamas. She lay down in the bed in Gryffindor Tower on the first night of her first year at Hogwarts, and outside the high windows the Scottish mountains were dark and close, and the sky was full of stars that didn't care about prophecies. She thought, "I'm going to find out what I am." And then, because she was also 11 years old and had been awake since 6 in the morning, and had crossed the country on a train and been sorted by a sentient hat and eaten more food than was strictly advisable, she fell asleep. 3 floors below in the boys' dormitory, Harry Potter lay awake for exactly 12 more minutes, looking at the ceiling and thinking about a castle full of secrets and a year full of whatever came next. He felt the shape of it, big and unresolved and alive, the way the best things always were. Then he fell asleep too. Trevor the Toad, from inside Neville's bedside drawer where he had been placed for safekeeping, was completely silent. The castle breathed around them. It had been doing this for 1,000 years. It was comfortable with beginnings. Chapter 3, The Lessons Between the Lines. September at Hogwarts operated on a logic of accumulation, each day adding layers to the one before it, the castle revealing itself not all at once but incrementally, like a person who trusts you more the longer you stay. The staircases moved on schedules that weren't written down anywhere and had to be learned through repetition and failure. Portraits gave directions that were technically accurate and practically useless. The ceiling of the Great Hall reflected weather that was getting steadily less friendly as October approached, and the first years learned to read it the way sailors read the sky. Harry learned the castle the way he learned everything physical, by doing it until it was instinct. By the end of the second week, he could navigate from the dungeons to the astronomy tower in the dark, had located 3 passages that weren't in any map he'd found, and had a working theory about the staircase on the 4th floor that moved at noon specifically to inconvenience people coming from charms. Hermione learned it from above. She had the castle's floor plans memorized by day 3. She'd found a partial architectural survey in the library and filled the gaps with direct observation and one extremely productive conversation with a portrait of a 16th century stonemason who'd been involved in the East Wing extension. By the end of the second week, she could tell you not just where the staircases went, but why, which was a different kind of knowing. They were, Ron had decided, absolutely unbearable, and he meant it as the highest form of compliment. Charms was on Tuesdays and Thursdays, Transfiguration Monday and Wednesday, herbology twice a week in greenhouses that smelled of damp earth and something that Neville said was mooncalf dung, but with a very specific and pleasant quality to it. History of Magic was delivered by Professor Binns, a ghost who had died at his desk sometime in the previous century and apparently not noticed, and whose lectures operated at a frequency just below consciousness. Astronomy was at midnight, which Harry had immediately identified as the best scheduling decision any educational institution had ever made. And then there was potions. Potions was in the dungeons. The dungeons were cold and smelled of stone and old ingredients, and the particular sharpness of things that would hurt you if you weren't careful. The potions classroom had this quality too, benches scarred by decades of spilled things, shelves of jars containing substances that watched you back, and at the front of it all, Professor Severus Snape. Snape was a study in contrasts. He moved like someone who had decided very early in life that drama was a resource and had been hoarding it ever since. His robes were black, his hair was black, his expression suggested that he had arrived at his opinions about the world through a long and joyless process of verification and was not open to revision. He began the class by looking at his register, then he looked at the room. Potter, he said. The name landed like a dropped object. Harry looked up from arranging his ingredients. Here, Snape's eyes moved to Hermione. Something crossed his face, not the thing it did when he looked at Harry, which was old and specific and complicated, but something newer, uncertain almost, like a variable he hadn't accounted for. 2 Potters, he said. It seems that way, Hermione said, a beat. Snape looked at her the way you look at something you need to categorize. Miss Potter, he said, tell me what would I get if I added powdered root of asphodel to an infusion of wormwood? He asked it the way all people with something to prove ask questions, quickly, expecting failure, ready to perform disappointment. The classroom tensed. Hermione said, a powerful sleeping potion known as the Draught of Living Death, though the modern preparation typically adds valerian root to extend the duration. The asphodel also carries some symbolism. It grows in the meadows of the underworld in Greek mythology, which is either coincidence or a naming convention by a brewer with a dark sense of humor. She said it plainly, not performing intelligence, just answering a question. Snape held the pause a moment too long. 2 points to Gryffindor, he said. His voice was exactly level. He moved his gaze to Harry. Mr. Potter, where would you look if I told you to find a bezoar? Stomach of a goat, Harry said. It's an antidote to most poisons. You can find them in most well-stocked apothecaries, or you could harvest one directly, which would require a goat. You've memorized the textbook. I've read the textbook, Harry said. There's a difference. I actually wanted to know. Something moved in Snape's face. It wasn't quite expression, more like the ghost of one, a thing that had happened a long time ago and left only the impression. 1 point to Gryffindor, he said. Begin the ball cure potion, page 5. He moved away through the rows of benches, robes sweeping, and didn't look back at either of them. In the next row, Ron was already looking between the twins with wide eyes, the expression of someone who had just watched people navigate a minefield and emerge unharmed. That was it, he whispered. That was it, Hermione said, beginning to measure her porcupine quills. He's horrible to everyone else. He was going to try to be horrible to us, Harry said quietly, not looking up. He changed his mind halfway through. Hermione didn't comment. She was thinking about the way Snape had said her mother's name. He hadn't said it out loud, but it had been there in his face when he looked at her. The way some people looked at things they'd lost. She'd seen it before in Remus, sometimes when he thought nobody was watching. She was always watching. She added her porcupine quills at the precise moment the instructions indicated, and her cauldron produced the exact pale pink it was supposed to, and she noted the color and the consistency and the temperature, and filed all three away in the part of her mind that kept things until they became useful. Defense against the dark arts was the class she'd been waiting for. Not because she didn't know it already. She'd been doing defensive magic with James since she was 8, practical application 3 mornings a week over the summer, and she could hold a shield charm under duress for significantly longer than anyone in the first year would expect, but because Quirrell was teaching it, and she had been thinking about Quirrell's doubled magical signature since the sorting feast. She arrived 3 minutes early, found a seat in the second row with a clear view of the teacher's desk, and watched Quirrell set up. Harry slid in beside her a minute later. He looked at her face and then at Quirrell and said nothing because they'd had the conversation already in the dormitory corridor the night after the feast, and he'd come to the same conclusion she had by a different route. Harry's route was instinct, something wrong about the man, something that sat badly in the back of his neck. Hermione's route was evidence and theory. They met in the same place. Quirrell was nervous, not in a general way, not the nerves of a man who found teaching difficult, but in the specific way of someone managing a pressure from somewhere underneath. He talked about the theory of dark creature defense with a stammer that seemed partially genuine and partially cultivated, like a man who had decided to play a character and had been doing it long enough that the character had half-eaten the person. But when he wrote on the board, his hand was steady. When encountering a W-elf, he was saying, the primary defense, the silver deterrent method only works in proximity, Hermione said. Under 5 feet, the more reliable primary defense against a werewolf is distance. They can't sustain full-speed pursuit at long range, and a basic impediment jinx at transformation phase is significantly more effective than any contact-based deterrent. The class had gone quiet. Not the uncomfortable quiet of someone being embarrassing, but the listening quiet of people who had just heard something interesting. Quirrell's chalk had stopped. He turned. His eyes, when they found her, were doing something she'd been waiting for, something involuntary. The doubled quality of his magical signature sharpened for just a second, the way a sound gets louder when something startles the person making it. There it is, she thought. Miss Peapotter, Quirrell said, and his voice was very careful. That's quite advanced for her first year. I read a lot over the summer, she said pleasantly. Where did you? I have a very good library at home. She held his gaze. My mother is a charms researcher. She keeps comprehensive notes on magical creature interaction studies. A beat. Should I not share? I'm happy to save comments for after class if it disrupts the flow. The politeness was a thing she'd inherited from somewhere, not James, who went straight at things, and not exactly Lily either, who was precise but never oblique. It was her own, a particular instrument. The offer to be quiet was genuine. The implication underneath, I have already made you uncomfortable and we both know why, was also genuine. Quirrell turned back to the board. She looked at Harry. He made a small gesture with 2 fingers, the one that meant noted in their private language, and looked at his own parchment. After class, they walked back through the corridor in a silence that was thinking rather than empty. He's hiding something physical, Hermione said. The turban, Harry said. He keeps his back to the room when he can, and the turban, he adjusted it twice when you mentioned the 3rd-floor corridor at breakfast, and he thought no one was watching. How do you know he was watching me mention it? Because I was watching him. Harry glanced at her. You're sort of terrifying. I'm thorough, she said. What do you think is under the turban? He was quiet for a moment. Something that shouldn't be there. Agreed. They walked on. The castle moved around them, indifferent and enormous. Transfiguration was McGonagall's domain in the way that all the best professors' subjects were theirs, not just taught there but inhabited. The classroom felt like her, precise, demanding, warm underneath the precision in a way you had to be paying attention to notice. She had been watching the twins since the sorting. Not obviously, she was too good for obvious, but Hermione had catalogued the pattern, the particular way McGonagall's eyes tracked to them when she was testing the class's understanding, The half-second longer she held a question open when one of them had already raised a hand, as though she was deciding whether to call on them immediately or let someone else have the attempt first. Today was matchstick to needle. The transformation principle was relatively straightforward, object-to-object transfiguration at the same scale, close material relationship, no biological component, and most of the class managed partial transformation by the end of the lesson. Ron got the point but not the taper. Neville turned his matchstick a concerning shade of silver but didn't change the shape. One Gryffindor near the back produced what appeared to be a very small, confused eel. Harry did it in 4 minutes, which he clearly found too slow. He was already attempting to reverse it when McGonagall came to check his work. Reverse transfiguration is third year, she said. I know, he said, but the theory's the same as forward, just applied to the return state. I was testing whether you could use the original object's memory if the matchstick has some kind of residual. Object memory is not a function of transfiguration, McGonagall said. It's not in the textbook, Harry agreed, but the needle went back to exactly matchstick without any effort on my part. That suggests something. McGonagall looked at him for a moment that ran slightly long. Come and see me during office hours, she said. That's a conversation that will take longer than we have. She moved on. Harry looked at Hermione. Don't say anything, he said. I wasn't going to say anything. You had the face. I was going to say the object memory theory is interesting and you might be right. He blinked. Oh, you are periodically right about things. She looked at her own needle, perfect, clean, exact, and then did what she'd been holding back for 10 minutes. She transfigured it into a needle, then into a pin, then into a fine silver wire about 8 inches long, maintaining the transformation arc across 3 separate states without returning to the original object. The wire glittered on her desk. McGonagall at the front of the room turned around as though she'd felt something. She walked back to Hermione's desk. She looked at the wire. She looked at Hermione. Multi-stage transfiguration, she said. The principle seemed extensible, Hermione said. This is third-year material. I know, Miss Potter. McGonagall's voice had shifted to the register it used when she was saying something important and presenting it as something factual. You will also come to office hours. I was going to ask, Hermione said. McGonagall looked between the two of them. Then she did the thing she did very rarely. She smiled briefly, privately, in the direction of a point just above their heads. Your mother, she said to neither of them specifically, was the most talented student I ever taught transfiguration. A pause. I'm revising that opinion. She walked back to the front. Ron, who had witnessed this whole exchange, looked at his still not quite a needle matchstick with the expression of someone taking stock of his situation. I live with you people now, he said to the matchstick. You chose this, Neville said sympathetically. I did, Ron agreed. I genuinely did, and I regret nothing. Quidditch trials were in October. Harry had been waiting for them with the patience of a person who is not particularly patient about things they care about, which is to say, audibly. He'd spent the first 3 weeks accumulating Quidditch grievances about not being allowed to play competitively yet, which he processed by flying above the Quidditch pitch on weekday evenings during the open practice hour. He wasn't technically breaking the first-year broomstick restriction because he was using a school broom, which the letter of the rule didn't address. Hermione had pointed out that the spirit of the rule was pretty clear. Harry had pointed out that he wasn't the one who wrote the rule. She'd let it go mostly because she was usually in the library during the open practice hour and couldn't effectively supervise. What he could do on a broom was, she had observed it twice, watching from the ground while ostensibly reading, something that moved past skill into something harder to name. He didn't fly like someone who had learned it. He flew like someone who had remembered it. A snitch-sized stone he'd been chasing for practice on the 3rd evening. He'd caught it 3 times in 4 minutes, once upside down. The Gryffindor Quidditch captain, a 6th-year named Oliver Wood, witnessed this from the stands, went slightly pale, and immediately sent Harry a note requesting his presence at the following Tuesday's session on the basis of needing a seeker. McGonagall, it turned out, had already written to him. Harry came back from the first session looking lit from inside, not triumphant, not even that excited, just settled, like a piece had moved into position. Wood's a lunatic, he told Hermione, about Quidditch specifically or in general. Specifically, he made me memorize the rule book in 2 hours. You memorized a rule book? Under duress, a pause. It's actually interesting. She looked up from her S. Harry Potter just called a rule book interesting. The application is interesting, like the rule about bludger interaction with the keeper's zone is theoretically straightforward, but in practice it creates this gap in the defensive. I understand, she said. You've been converted. I was already converted, I'm just more informed now. He dropped onto the armchair across from her. I'm playing first game against Slytherin. Wood wants to keep me secret until then. That's a terrible strategy. Everyone will have seen you practicing. That's what I said. What did Wood say? He said tactics were his department. He's going to be very upset when Slytherin has already briefed their seeker by Thursday. I told him that too. She went back to her essay. Harry picked up a book from the table, not his own, one of hers, something on charms theory, and started reading it with the manner of someone who intends to argue about it later. She didn't comment. This was also a known pattern. The fire crackled in the common room hearth. Most of the tower was at dinner still. They'd eaten early to get the best seats by the fire, which Hermione had determined by empirical observation was the warmest spot in the room, and maintained a consistent temperature through the evening. Outside the windows, the October night was doing what October nights in Scotland did, which was everything at once. "Hermione," Harry said, "what did the hat actually say to you?" She'd been waiting for this. Not dreading it, she didn't dread conversations with Harry, even the ones that went somewhere complicated, but aware of it the way you're aware of a door you need to open eventually. "It said I was meant to be here," she said, "that the magic that brought me to the family was real, not accidental." A pause. "The fire did what fires do." "You already knew that," Harry said. "I knew it the way you know things that you've been told." "This was the hat knew things about me that I haven't been told." She set her quill down. "It said the remembering is still coming." Harry closed the book. He had the particular quality of attention that he had when something mattered, not intense, not heavy, just completely present. His full attention was a comfortable thing, it didn't push. "Mum said she wants to talk at Christmas," he said, "about the archive. You noticed that too?" "I've been noticing it since Diagon Alley." She looked at the fire. "I think she's going to tell me something about how I came to be in the family. I think it's—" She paused, choosing words with the care she gave everything she cared about. "I think it's something complicated about where I was before." "You were always with us," Harry said. "I know that's not—" She stopped. "I know that, Harry. I know you're my brother, and Mum and Dad are my parents, and that's not something I'm uncertain about." "Okay. I'm just trying to understand what else is true at the same time." He nodded. Not quickly, he let the nod of "Wait, do you think about them? Whoever had you before?" She was quiet for a long moment. The fire, the October night, the castle breathing around them. "Sometimes," she said, "there's a ceiling, white, a smell like something antiseptic and something baking at the same time, a woman reading." She looked at her hands. "It's not a sad memory, that's the strange part, it's just there. When you figure it out," Harry said, "I'll still be here." It was such a Harry thing to say, direct, clean, no fanfare, no performance of support, just the fact of it stated. She looked at him for a moment and felt the thing she always felt, the specific gravity of having a person who was absolutely in your corner without condition. "I know," she said. "Good." He picked the book back up. "This chapter on summoning charms is wrong, by the way. The direction of magical force isn't toward the caster, it's toward the intent. There's a distinction." She took the book from him and looked at the page. She read for a moment. "You're right, that's an error in the second edition. The first edition has the correct mechanics." "How do you know there's a first edition?" "There's always a first edition." "How do you know the first edition is different?" "Because I've read it." He stared at her. "When?" he said. "Over the summer, Mum had it." "Why didn't you? You never asked." He opened his mouth, closed it, pointed at her. "You're doing the thing where you have information and you're waiting for the right moment." "I'm doing the thing where I have information and I'm organized about how I share it," she said, and went back to her essay with the trace of a smile she mostly managed to suppress. The first real incident with Snape happened on a Thursday in late October, not in class. Class had settled into a pattern. Snape would ask something difficult. Hermione would answer before he finished the question. Harry would answer the follow-up, and Snape would give points in a way that seemed to cost him physically and then move on. It was a cold détente and everyone in the class knew it. This happened in the corridor outside the potions dungeon. They'd stayed late to redo a measurement. Harry's lacewing flies had been off by a fraction, which he'd noticed and she'd confirmed, and Snape had told them they could stay and correct it or take a failing mark, which had been stated as a choice but wasn't. When they finally left the dungeon, the corridor was empty, torchlit, and Snape was still at his desk, visible through the open door. Hermione stopped. Harry looked at her. She was looking at the door. "He's reading your essay," she said quietly. "How can you tell from here?" "Because he read mine in class and I can see the color of the parchment." Harry looked. She was right. The parchment on Snape's desk was the cream color they'd used, not the standard white student essay parchment. "He never reads essays after hours," she said. "He always marks in class or at the start of the next session." Harry said nothing. "He wrote to our parents," she said, not guessing, "at the start of term. We got that owl from Mum asking how potions was going. She never asks about individual classes." Harry thought about it. He told her he was keeping an eye on us. Or she asked him to. Hermione turned away from the door. Or both. They walked back to Gryffindor Tower through the moving staircases and the torchlit dark, and she thought about a man reading her essay after hours with his door open, which was a strange choice for a man who carefully curated everything about himself, and she thought about the look in his face when he'd first said her name, the one that was specific and old and didn't have anything to do with her, and she thought, Lily Evans, that's what he sees. He sees Lily Evans's daughter and he doesn't know what to do about it. She filed it. Everything had its time. The troll happened on Halloween and was, in Hermione's assessment, a deeply unimpressive threat that had been allowed to become a crisis through institutional failure. She had been in the bathroom, not crying, as the story would later be told by people who hadn't been there, but working through a particularly complex runic substitution problem on a piece of parchment while using the bathroom as a quiet workspace, which was a different thing entirely. The screaming started in the corridor and she'd heard it and registered it, and was already moving toward the door when the troll walked through the wall of the adjacent stall. It was 12 feet of stupidity and aggression, and it smelled terrible, and its club was larger than she was. She had 3 seconds to assess. The door was behind the troll, the windows were too high, the stall dividers wouldn't hold, and her wand was already in her hand. She hit it with an impediment jinx that stopped it for approximately 2 seconds, enough to get herself out of the bathroom stall and into the open space of the room where she had angles, and then she banished the hand dryer off the wall and into its left knee with a force charm that James had taught her, and which was technically a 7th-year dueling spell, and the troll went down on one knee with a sound like a tree falling. Harry and Ron arrived through the door at a run. Harry took in the situation in approximately 1 second, pointed his wand upward and hit the troll with a knockback jinx from below that sent it staggering, and then Ron, without hesitation, with the kind of instinct you didn't know you had until you needed it, grabbed the troll's own club with a summoning charm and dropped it from the ceiling onto its head. The troll sat down heavily, then it fell over. The 3 of them stood in the debris of the bathroom, broken sinks, one missing hand dryer, water running everywhere, and looked at the unconscious troll. "Good club charm," Hermione said to Ron. "Good banishing hex," Ron said to Hermione. They both looked at Harry. "I mostly jumped," Harry said. "In my defense, I got here and it was already mostly handled." Then McGonagall was in the doorway and Snape behind her and Quirrell behind him, and the moment became a different kind of moment, the official kind with consequences. What happened next was predictable: shock, interrogation, threatened points, reversed points when the story became clear. McGonagall took 5 points from each of them for being in the corridor and gave them back 10 each for exceptional presence of mind in a crisis, which was the Gryffindor way of saying I can't quite punish bravery even when it arrives inconveniently. Snape, throughout all of this, said nothing. He stood in the doorway and looked at the unconscious troll and then at the 3 children and then at the bathroom and then at Hermione specifically. He gave her one look, complicated, layered, the look of a man updating a file he'd been keeping for a while. Then he left. Later, in the common room, Hermione described the magical inconsistency in Snape's defensive positioning that suggested he'd injured his leg recently and was compensating for it with his robe length. "He was bitten," Harry said immediately. "3rd-floor corridor." They looked at each other. "We need to go look," Harry said. "We need to not go look," Hermione said, "because we are 11 and we don't have enough information yet, and going in without information is how people get. But we need to know what's up there. We will know. I'm working on it." She had the expression that meant several things were happening in her mind simultaneously and they were all pointing the same direction. "I have a theory. Give me 2 weeks. What are we doing for 2 weeks? Research." "Hermione, 2 weeks, she said. "Go look." He looked at her for a moment, then 2 weeks. Ron, who had been listening to this entire exchange with his chin in his hand, said, "When you say we, obviously you're included," Harry said. Ron sat up straighter. "Right, then are we sure about this?" "No," Hermione said. "We're researching specifically because we're not sure." "That's the most you answer," Ron said and seemed satisfied by it. Neville from the other armchair, "I'm also here." "We know," they said in unison. Neville nodded. Trevor the Toad had escaped again and was sitting on the back of Neville's chair with the dignified air of an animal who had achieved escape velocity and would be caught again eventually but was not in a rush about it. The fire burned down. The castle ticked around them, ancient and knowing, and the night pressed against the windows. Somewhere below them, presumably, a troll was being removed by someone whose job this was and who was having a deeply strange Halloween. And in the room on the 3rd floor, the one with the door that Snape had his leg bitten outside of, and Quirrell kept touching his turban whenever someone mentioned, something waited in the dark with the patience of things that don't know they're being watched. Hermione knew they were being watched. She wrote 3 pages of notes before she went to bed, laying out what she knew and what she suspected and the gaps between them. She wrote the word Horcrux in the margin lightly and then stared at it for a long moment and crossed it out because that was a theory she wasn't ready to put on paper yet. The knowledge in Lily's library was specific. The chapter on soul magic was specific. She had been 7 and she had read it because she read everything and she had not understood all of it, but she had understood enough and the word had stuck in her, the way truly frightening words did, quietly, insistently, without drama. She put the notes away. She lay in the dark and listened to the castle. 2 weeks, she'd said. 14 days to build the picture before they walked into whatever was underneath the 3rd floor and found out if her theory was right. She was already fairly certain it was right. She was hoping it wasn't. Chapter 4, The Mirror and the Philosopher's Stone. 2 weeks became 11 days because Harry found the trapdoor on day 9, not intentionally or not entirely. He'd been doing his disillusionment practice in the 3rd floor corridor after midnight, which was technically 3 separate rule violations and which Hermione had categorized as inadvisable, and the dog had heard him through the locked door and the sound it made had been large enough and specific enough that Harry had come back and described it with the precise accuracy of someone who needed to be taken seriously. 3 heads, he said. 3-headed dog, Hermione said. Enormous 3-headed dog. The door bowed outward when it came at it. He sat on the edge of his bed, which he'd gotten into for the appearance of sleeping and hadn't come close to. It was standing on a trapdoor. "Fluffy," Ron said from his own bed. They both looked at him. "What, you named it?" Harry said. "I didn't name it, it had a quality. You'd understand if you'd seen it." "I saw it." "Then you understand." Hermione had her notes out. She looked at the page she'd labeled third floor known and made 2 additions: Cerberus, three-headed dog, Fluffy, trapdoor below. Then she made a third: music, dog sleep to music. Greek mythology consistent, Cerberus subdued by Orpheus's lyre, research enchanted instruments. 11 days, Harry said. She looked up. We said 2 weeks, he said. It's been 11 days. You've had 11 days of research and I've now been inside the corridor and come back and I want to know what you know. She considered delaying for principle, decided against it. Sit down properly, she said. He sat properly. Ron, already sitting, sat more properly. Neville appeared from the bathroom in his dressing gown, assessed the situation and sat on the end of Ron's bed with Trevor on his knee. She opened the notes. There is something being hidden underneath that floor, she said. Something that required a Cerberus and at least 5 additional enchanted defenses based on the involvement of multiple staff members I've been tracking. The object is the Philosopher's Stone. Silence. How do you know? Neville said. Nicola's Flamel, she said. He's the only known creator of a Philosopher's Stone. He's 665 years old, which means he has one and it's functional. He disappeared from public records 18 months ago. The same month the stone was moved from Gringotts Vault 713, which was broken into the same day as our trip to Diagon Alley, which Dad mentioned and didn't think I noticed, and brought to Hogwarts for protection. How do you know it was moved to Hogwarts? Ron asked. Because where else would Dumbledore hide something? He has this building. She turned a page. The staff members involved in the additional defenses: McGonagall, almost certainly a transfiguration-based challenge; Sprout, possibly a plant obstacle; Devil's Snare would be my first guess; Flitwick, a charms-based puzzle, probably keys given his love of mobile enchantments; Snape, the man bruise in his sleep, something potions-related; and possibly Quirrell, which is why I need to tell you the other part. She put the notes down. The fire in the dormitory grate was low. Quirrell is not alone in his body, she said. Ron made a sound. His magical signature is doubled, she continued. I've been monitoring it in class for 2 months. The secondary signature is old, very old, and it's degraded, like something that's been without a proper form for a long time. I can't be certain without close examination, but based on what I know about the Dark Lord's current state, the soul magic I've read about, and the fact that Quirrell returned from Albania, where Voldemort has reportedly been existing as a wraith for the last decade. He's in there with Voldemort, Harry said. He said it flatly, without theatre. Hermione looked at him and saw not fear, not even shock, just a boy taking a new piece of information and putting it in the right place. I think Voldemort is attached to Quirrell's body, yes, she said, which means he's been in Hogwarts all year, which means he's here for the stone. Neville was holding Trevor with both hands now. Ron was looking at the wall with the expression of a man having a private conversation with himself about life choices. Okay, Harry said. Okay, Ron said. He says okay. What's the alternative? Harry said. It's already happening. Okay is the correct response. What's the play? Hermione had been thinking about this for 6 days. She had diagrams. We can go to Dumbledore, she said, which is the sensible option, and I want to put it on the table. Dumbledore knows, Harry said immediately. She nodded. I think he does too. I think the whole setup, the stone here, the defenses, the deliberate accessibility of the third-floor corridor is a trap for Voldemort. A test, she said, possibly for us, possibly for Quirrell, possibly for both. She folded her hands on her notes. Dumbledore is very good at letting situations develop. I've read about him enough to know he prefers to see what people do when they're tested rather than telling them what to do. The corridor is too obvious for a real secret. The clues are too findable. I think he wants to see what we'll do. Then we do it, Harry said. Carefully, she said, obviously carefully. Harry, I want to be clear about what I mean by carefully. Not our usual carefully where you say the word and mean with adequate preparation. I mean actually carefully. Because whatever is in that tunnel is designed to test fully trained adult wizards, and we're better than most fully trained adult wizards, he said. That is both true and not the point. What's the point? The point is that Quirrell, Voldemort, has had 10 years to plan this, and he's not stupid. The people who built those defenses are not stupid. If we go in knowing we might not be able to handle everything, and we go in with a way out. He looked at her for a long moment. You already have a plan, he said. I have 3 plans, she said. The first one assumes we can handle everything. The second assumes we can't handle the final obstacle. The third assumes Quirrell gets there before us and we're following him in. Which one do we use? That depends on when we go. When do we go? She picked up the last page of her notes. It was dated 3 days ago and at the bottom underlined. Quirrell has been spending evenings in the third-floor corridor. He's accelerating. He's going to move soon, within the week. Tonight, she said. I think tonight is the right moment. He's distracted. There's a Quidditch Cup meeting that will keep several staff members occupied until late, and Dumbledore received an owl this afternoon that I believe was a false emergency. Someone bought themselves a window. Voldemort manufactured a reason to get Dumbledore out of the castle, Harry said. I think so. Ron stood up. His expression had gone from alarm to the particular look he got when he'd decided something and was finished deliberating. Right, he said. Let me get my wand. Neville stood up too. His hands were slightly unsteady, but his jaw was set. He put Trevor in the bedside drawer, not roughly, with care, and turned around. I'm coming, he said. No one argued. Midnight in Hogwarts moved differently from midnight anywhere else. The castle didn't go dark. Torches stayed lit. Portraits muttered in their sleep. The staircases continued their slow migrations, but it went deep, in a way that was less about silence and more about the sensation of being very small inside something very old and very patient. They used Harry's invisibility cloak, James's cloak technically, which had been pressed into Harry's hands on platform 9 by a grinning James who'd said just in case, and which Hermione had immediately recognized as a genuine Deathly Hallow, and had spent 2 minutes being furious about how casually it had been handled before concluding that this was exactly how the Potters handled things. 4 under 1 cloak was tight. Hermione and Harry were at the front, Ron and Neville behind, moving in the coordinated shuffle of people who had been under cloak together before and knew how to make it work. They reached the 3rd floor without incident. The locked door to the corridor was no match for a simple Alohomora. It had never been intended to keep out students who already knew what was beyond it. The chamber was larger than the corridor suggested, a high-ceilinged room that existed in the specific architectural logic of Hogwarts, where internal spaces didn't always match external ones. Fluffy was there, enormous and warm-smelling, all 3 heads turning toward them with the slow, heavy certainty of something that didn't need to hurry. Hermione pulled a small enchanted music box from her robes. She'd built it herself over the past week. She'd never enchanted a music box before, but the theory was clear enough and the execution had taken 2 nights. She wound it and let it play, and the tune it produced was simple and cycling, and Fluffy's eyes went heavy in 30 seconds and all 3 of them were closed in under 2 minutes. Good, Harry said. They lifted the trapdoor and dropped through, Devil's Snare first, exactly as she'd predicted. The plant was old and well-established, filling the chamber below the trapdoor in a mass of writhing tendrils that responded immediately to the warmth of living bodies. Ron and Neville went into it before they could stop themselves. The drop was fast and the snare moved faster, but Hermione was already casting before she'd fully landed, a broad, sustained bluebell flame that pushed the plant back without burning it catastrophically because she had no interest in destroying Sprout's work even in a crisis. The plant released, they dropped to the floor. That was almost impressive, Harry told the Devil's Snare, and then they were through the next door, keys. An enormous chamber full of flying winged keys, one specific one needed to unlock the door on the far wall, broomsticks available. Flitwick's work elegant, properly conceived, and Harry solved it in 90 seconds while the rest of them tracked the keys he was watching. He moved on the broom the way he always did, like the air was cooperating with him rather than being navigated, and the lock turned and the door opened. Hermione noted as they went through that the right key had a bent wing. She would have found it by elimination. Harry had found it by recognition. He'd seen it, the way he saw things moving that other people processed as blur, different kinds of fast. The chessboard was Neville's moment. They stood at the edge of it, a complete wizarding chessboard, full-scale, white pieces already positioned at the far end, the black pieces waiting, and Ron said someone has to play in a tone that was already accepting the answer. Ron, Hermione began. I'm the chess player, he said. You all know I'm the chess player. Don't just get on a piece and let me think. She wanted to argue. She looked at the board and ran the strategies in her head and concluded honestly that he was right, not because she couldn't play chess, but because she'd never played chess with this kind of ruthlessness, and the board was reading Ron with a kind of recognition, piece to player, the way wands chose their owners. Knight, she said to him. Your first move is knight to f5. After that I'm trusting you. He looked at her, she looked at the board. Knight to f5, he repeated and sat on the knight. It took 12 minutes. She would think about those 12 minutes for a long time afterward, the way Ron played chess, which was nothing like how he did everything else. In everything else he was warm and instinctive and occasionally scattered. On the chessboard he was cold, not cruel, the coldness of pure clarity, a mind operating without the static of social considerations. He saw 6 moves ahead without apparent effort, and he made sacrifices with the calm of a player who understood that the goal was the win, not the preservation. He sacrificed his knight in the 9th move. He'd been on the knight. The piece threw him off as it moved to its death position, and he hit the stone floor and didn't get up immediately, and Hermione was at his side before she decided to move. Ron, I'm fine, he said through gritted teeth. Go, the board's done, go. She looked at the board, it was done. She looked at Ron, concussion possible, and a wrist he was holding at a careful angle, and made the calculation she hated making, the one where the stakes of stopping were weighed against the cost of leaving. Neville stays with him, she said. I'll stay, Neville said immediately. You'll send a message with your wand, red sparks we discussed. If anything changes, we'll come back through. She looked at Ron. His face was pale, but his eyes were clear. You played brilliantly. He managed something that wasn't quite a smile. You said knight to f5, and then you did everything else. She left before she could reconsider it. The troll in the next chamber was already unconscious, and she didn't examine who had done it or when. Through the next door the potions puzzle, 7 bottles, 2 neutral, 1 forward, 1 back, 2 poisonous, 1 safe, and she read the riddle once and solved it in 40 seconds because Snape had written a logic puzzle to guard the Philosopher's Stone, and this was genuinely the funniest thing she had ever encountered in an academic setting. She pocketed the forward bottle and handed Harry the return bottle. He looked at it. Just in case, she said, his jaw tightened. I'm not going back. I know you're not, but in case I need to send it back to you from the other side, you should have it. He took it. They went through the black flames together. The mirror of Erist was on the other side in a circular chamber of high dark stone. It stood in the center of the room, ornate and enormous, and it was the first thing that struck her because she'd read about the mirror and she hadn't known it was here, and this changed things. The second thing that struck her was Quirrell. He was standing in front of the mirror with his back to them, and he was very still, and the quality of the stillness was different from a person thinking. It was the stillness of someone receiving instructions. He turned. "Potter," he said. The stammer was gone. His voice was quiet and clear, and it came from slightly further back in his body than voices usually did, like it was sharing a cavity with something. "Both Potters. I wondered which of you it would be, or if it would be both." His eyes moved to Hermione. "You've been watching me since the sorting feast," she said. A pause. "You're cleverer than I was told. Most people are." Quirrell tilted his head. "You know what I am, what this is." He touched his turban. "And you came anyway." "We came because you're going to take the stone," Harry said. He stepped forward, not aggressively, just closing the distance, making himself present. "And we're here to make sure that doesn't happen." Quirrell smiled. It was a wrong smile, too wide, the expression of someone who had learned smiling from a description rather than experience. "You're 11 years old. That keeps coming up," Harry said. "It doesn't get more useful." "The stone is in the mirror," Hermione said. She was looking at the mirror's surface, which was showing her something she deliberately didn't focus on. "You've been standing in front of it because you can't get it out. The enchantment gives it to someone who wants to find it but not use it, and you want to use it." Quirrell's face shifted. The wrong smile slid. "So one of you will look for me." "No," Harry said. "I can hurt you." "You can try," Harry said, "but you'll be worried about the stone while you're doing it, and we won't be." It happened fast. Quirrell's wand came up and a Cruciatus curse, half-formed, tore the air between them. Harry threw himself right and Hermione left simultaneously, as though they'd rehearsed it, because in a sense they had. 200 mornings in the garden at Godric's Hollow, and she hit the floor in a roll, came up with her wand already moving and started casting. Not an attack. A suppression, the runic counter-curse she'd been building in her notebooks for 8 weeks, assembled from 3 different magical traditions, designed specifically for possession-class magical entities that were operating through a human vessel. She'd never tested it. She had extremely good reason to believe it would work. She cast it as a series, 7 runes, spoken sequentially, her wand tracing their forms in the air where they hung burning gold for a moment before they contracted and hit Quirrell like a wave going out from a stone dropped in water. Quirrell screamed. Not him, the thing wearing him. The sound that came from it was wrong in every possible way, a sound that had no business being made by a human throat, too high and too resonant, and carrying inside it the quality of something that had been going slowly mad for a long time. Quirrell's body went rigid. His turban unwound as though tugged by invisible hands, and what was underneath. Harry stood very still. He'd seen the face in photographs, descriptions in books. He'd seen it in the shape of the adult world sphere every time his name was mentioned in certain company. He knew it. Voldemort's face, or what had become of it, was pressed into the back of Quirrell's head, stretched over the wrong skull, grey and serpentine and ruined, and its eyes opened and they were red, and they found Harry with the specific attention of something that had been waiting a very long time. "Harry Potter," it said, and his name in that voice was like the word for the worst possible version of something. Harry's scar erupted. She saw him go white, saw his hand come up to his forehead, saw the pain hit him with a force that bent him, and then she watched him straighten, slowly, deliberately, like a person picking up something heavy and choosing to carry it. "You're a wraith attached to a dying man," Harry said through his teeth. "You haven't got a body, you haven't got a wand. You haven't got anything except someone else's face. I have 10,000 years of magic. You have nothing," Harry said. He moved to the mirror. She wanted to shout at him, wanted to tell him to wait, to let the runes finish working, to be careful, and she didn't, because Harry in this state was not careless. Harry in this state was the most precise he ever got. She'd seen it in the garden in August. She'd seen it in the troll bathroom. The worse the situation, the stiller he got, and the stiller he got, the more clearly he saw. He looked into the mirror. She looked too, she couldn't help it, and in the mirror she saw herself standing exactly where she was standing, but holding something cupped in both hands, something that glowed faintly, and in the mirror she put it in her pocket. She felt something drop into her actual pocket. Her hand went to it immediately, small, warm, heavier than it looked. A small red stone, irregularly shaped. She looked at the mirror. Hermione winked at her. "Harry," she said. He looked at her. She showed him the stone in her palm. The silence that followed was very complete. Voldemort's voice from the back of Quirrell's head went from persuasive to something else, something stripped of pretense, raw and ancient and furious. "Give me the stone. Give it to me and I will give you everything. I will tell you what you are, girl. I will tell you where you came from." "I know what I am," Hermione said. And she looked at the wraith on the back of Quirrell's head, and she cast the second-to-last rune in the sequence, the separation rune, the one that told 2 things that had merged. "You are not the same, you were never the same, come apart." Quirrell convulsed. The spirit tore free, literally, visibly, a dark shredding thing separating from the man it had been wearing, and the room went cold the way rooms go cold when something passes through them that doesn't belong, and then it was flying at Harry and she screamed his name. Harry raised his hands. He didn't have time to cast. He put his hands up instinctively, palms out, the way Lily had taught them once, in one specific lesson about sacrificial magic and protective enchantments. If you ever feel it in you, just let it out, don't direct it, just let it. The protection left him in a wave of white light. The wraith hit it and came apart. Not destroyed, she understood that even in the moment that Voldemort was not gone and would not be gone for a very long time, but shredded, scattered, driven back into the formless state it had been inhabiting for a decade. The room went still, Quirrell crumpled. The dark shreds of the spirit swirled once like smoke finding a vent, and then they were gone. The stone in her pocket was warm. Harry's hands were shaking. She crossed the room in 4 steps and grabbed his arm, and he let her, which was how she knew how much it had cost him. Harry did not usually accept being steadied. Scar, she said. Bad, he said, fading. We need to get out before the enchantments. Quirrell, she looked at Quirrell. He was breathing. The magic that had been sustaining him was gone, and she could see even across the room, even with the limited diagnostic ability she had without properly trained medical spellwork, that he was badly, deeply damaged. Whatever Voldemort had done to him in the sharing of his body had left nothing intact. He's alive, she said. He needs more than us. We need to get out and get Dumbledore. Dumbledore's not. He's coming back, she said. The false emergency. Voldemort couldn't make a false emergency and then succeed, or there would be no need for the emergency. He'll be back. She pulled Harry toward the door. Come on, he went. They went back through the black flame, back through the empty logic puzzle room, back across the chessboard where Neville was crouched over Ron conscious now, color returned, wrist still cradled, and then back up through the devil's snare chamber, pulling each other through and up, and finally back up through the trap door and into the corridor and onto the cold stone floor of the 3rd floor, and it was over, and they were breathing. They lay on the floor of the corridor for a moment, just breathing. Did it work? Neville said, yes, Hermione said. Did you get the... She held up the stone. Neville looked at it, then at her, then at Harry. Are you okay? He asked Harry. Fine, Harry said. He'd gone flat with exhaustion in the way he went after major magical output, not depleted, just very quiet. I'll be fine. You put your hands up at a wraith. It seemed like the right move. It seemed... Neville stopped. You know what? I'm going to stop being surprised by you too, and it's going to make my life significantly better. Wise, Ron said. They lay on the floor a little longer. Dumbledore came back at 1 in the morning. He found them in the hospital wing. Madame Pomfrey had been pulled out of bed and was furious about it, and had still put them each in a bed and made them drink restorative potions before anyone was allowed to say a word about anything. He stood in the doorway of the hospital wing with his traveling robes still on and the dust of wherever he'd been still on his shoes, and he looked at 4 children in hospital beds and the Philosopher's Stone in a bowl on Hermione's nightstand where she'd put it for Madame Pomfrey to see, and his face did something complicated and private. He came and sat in the chair between Harry and Hermione's beds. Professor Quirrell, Harry said. Being attended to, Dumbledore said. He is alive. Recover, though not easily. A pause. And the stone. Hermione handed it to him. I don't think you should keep it here, she said. Not when there's a reasonable chance another attempt could be made. Nicholas Flamel should decide what happens to it. Dumbledore looked at the stone, then at her. I had reached the same conclusion. Good. A silence. The hospital wing hummed faintly with the magic of a room that spent its time putting people back together. You knew, Harry said, that we'd go in. Dumbledore looked at him. You set it up to be found, Harry said. The corridor, the clues you wanted to see. I wanted to ensure, Dumbledore said carefully, that if Voldemort made an attempt on the stone, there would be more standing between him and it than enchantments. He looked at his hands. I'm not proud of placing that weight on children. We're not children the way you usually mean the word, Hermione said. No, he said, you are not. He looked at her with those eyes that were bright and deep and perpetually reading things she hadn't put on the surface. The runic countercurse for possession. I was not aware that technique existed. It didn't, she said. I built it. He was quiet for a long moment. You built an original countercurse for magical possession at age 11. Over 8 weeks, she said, with access to a good library. Another pause, deeper than the last. Your mother, he said, will be very proud. She'll probably be furious first, Harry said. Then proud. That's the usual order. Dumbledore smiled. A real smile, not the performance of wisdom but the genuine article, an old man genuinely, helplessly amused. Yes, he said, that is generally the order. He stood. He picked up the stone and held it for a moment, and then he tucked it into his robes with the particular care of a man handling something that had cost more than it was worth. He looked at the 4 of them, tired, medically accounted for entirely themselves. Rest, he said. There will be time for questions. He left. Harry looked at Hermione. He's going to watch us differently from now on. I know, she said. That might not be entirely comfortable. No, she agreed. But I'd rather be watched clearly than not watched at all. She lay back against the hospital wing pillow and felt the absence of the stone's warmth in her pocket like a removed pressure. The night pressed against the high windows. Her rune sequences were still burning in the back of her mind, the ones she'd used and the ones she'd held back and the ones she'd built but not needed. She thought about Voldemort saying, I will tell you what you are, girl. I will tell you where you came from. She thought about her mother's voice when you get back for Christmas. She thought about the mirror and the figure in it that looked like her holding something out. The mirror had shown her her deepest desire. She had expected it to show her something about her origins, some vision of another family, another ceiling, answers. It had shown her exactly where she was standing, in this room with these people with the stone. She pressed her hand flat against the mattress, solid, real. She closed her eyes. Harry was asleep in 4 minutes, Ron in 2. Neville had been asleep since his head hit the pillow. She lay awake a little longer, turning the night over, cataloguing it, the way the runes had felt leaving her wand, the specific quality of the cold when the spirit tore free, the white light from Harry's hands that had been the most beautiful and most frightening thing she'd seen in her 11 years. She filed it all. She would need it. She didn't know when, but she would need it. Then she slept. Chapter 5, Sum of Secrets. The train home was loud and celebratory in the way that only the last day of school could produce, a specific frequency of relief that started at the platform and built through the journey, students spilling into corridors, chocolate being traded, someone in a compartment 3 cars back playing something on what sounded like a badly tuned guitar. The Gryffindor contingent occupied 2 compartments and the corridor between them, and the volume suggested they felt they'd earned the space. Ron had a chocolate frog in each hand, and was in the middle of an extremely detailed tactical breakdown of the chess match that nobody had asked for, but nobody was stopping. Neville had Trevor in his lap, and was listening with genuine interest. Harry was half asleep against the window, which was his preferred way of existing on long journeys, apparently conserving energy in case the journey became interesting. Hermione was reading. Not anxiously, she'd finished her exams the previous week, and was satisfied with all of them and wasn't going to pretend otherwise. But because there was a specific chapter in advanced magical theory that she'd been meaning to get back to since February, and the train to King's Cross was 4 hours, and she had a bookmark 40 pages from the end. She got through 12 pages before she put the book down and looked out the window. England moved past in its summer version, long grass, motorway bridges, the backs of houses with their gardens showing, a horse standing in a field with the profound indifference of horses everywhere. The sky was doing the pale blue thing it did when it was genuinely warm rather than just not cold. "You're thinking," Harry said without opening his eyes. "I'm always thinking." "You're thinking at something, that's different." She looked at him. His eyes were still closed. His face had the relaxed quality it got on trains, the one that meant the motion was doing something useful to his brain. "Mum said we'd talk at Christmas," she said. "Then Christmas became Easter break became she's been putting it off." "She's scared," Harry said. "Mum doesn't get scared. She gets scared of specific things, losing things she loves." Hermione was quiet. The train moved. England moved. "Whatever she tells me," she said finally, "I need you to already know that it doesn't change anything. For me, I'm saying that now so I don't have to say it in the middle of whatever the conversation becomes." Harry opened one eye. "You're my sister." "I know." "Then stop making speeches about it." She picked her book back up. He closed his eye again. Across the compartment, Ron was describing the night sacrifice with the intensity of a man recounting the Battle of Hastings, and Neville was nodding along with Trevor, who appeared to also be nodding. She got through another 6 pages. Then she felt the shift not in the compartment but in herself, the thing that happened when her mind had been turning something over quietly long enough to arrive at what it actually wanted to say. She put the book down again. "I think she found the Granger family," she said. Harry was still for a moment. "Yeah," he said quietly. "I think so too." Godric's Hollow in summer smelled like cut grass and old stone and the particular green warmth of a garden that had been growing for 10 years and knew what it was doing. James was on the platform at King's Cross, just James, which was already information because Lily almost always came too when it mattered, and he hugged them both in the enormous total way he did everything physical, like he was making a statement about it. "How were the exams?" "Good," Harry said. "Define good." "I came first in Transfiguration and second in Charms." "Hermione came first in everything." "I came second in Transfiguration," Hermione said. "You came second in Transfiguration because McGonagall has a marking rubric that values process documentation, and you submitted your answers without showing the intermediate steps because you did them in your head. That's not a mistake, it's a methodology difference. Tell McGonagall that in September." "I will." James watched this exchange with the expression he got when his children were arguing, and he was enjoying it enormously. He grabbed both their trunks before they could protest and started toward the car. "Your mum's at home," he said. "She's made dinner. She wants to talk this evening." "A beat." "I know," Hermione said. James looked at her over his shoulder. "I've been working things out," she said. "I think I know most of it. I just want to hear it from her." He was quiet for a moment, loading trunks, not looking at her. "She's been trying to find the right way to say it for about 2 years, he said. "There isn't one. She's going to just say it and it's going to be complicated. You're allowed to find it complicated." "I know. I'm just saying there's no right way to feel about it." "Dad," she looked at him steadily. "I know, I've had all year to think about it." He looked at her. She watched him look at her the way he always looked at her when she said something that reminded him of Lily, that specific expression, pride and something older and softer underneath it. He nodded once and put the last trunk in the car, and they drove home in the summer evening with the windows down and the radio on, and nobody said anything important for a while, and that was right. Dinner was pasta. Lily always made pasta when she was managing anxiety, which she'd never acknowledged but which was a documented pattern in the family data. She cooked it with the focused attention she usually reserved for charms research, and it was very good, and the table talk was easy. School Ron Neville, the chess match which Ron had evidently already written to his mother about because Molly Weasley had sent a letter that arrived that morning calling him a hero in the true Gryffindor tradition, which Ron had described in his letter as a bit much, and which Hermione privately thought was entirely accurate. Harry ate 2 helpings. James ate 3. Lily ate 1 and pushed her plate aside and folded her hands on the table. Hermione, she said. I know, Hermione said. Lily blinked. I've been working it out all year, Hermione said. I found the word echo in your back library section in August. The sorting hat told me things. I have a version of the story. I want to know if I have the right version. Lily looked at James. He gave her nothing useful, which she clearly expected, because she turned back to Hermione and said, tell me your version. Hermione put her fork down. She'd thought about how to say this, tried several framings over several months in the particular way she tried things that mattered. She settled on direct. You did a sacrificial protection charm the night Voldemort attacked, she said. Harry was protected, but the magic was larger than one person. It created a gap, an echo space. And something about my magical signature resonated with the frequency of the protective spell, so I came through the gap. She looked at Lily. I was already born. I had another family. You didn't take me deliberately. The magic found me because I fit, and you kept me because... Her voice did something she hadn't planned. She steadied it. Because you chose to, she said. Lily's eyes were very bright. She wasn't crying. Lily didn't cry at the table. It was a whole thing, but her face was doing everything else. That's essentially correct, she said. There's a family, a muggle family, Grangers, I think, dentists, that's the smell in the memory, clean and slightly chemical. She looked at her hands. There's a woman with brown hair, silence. Jean Granger, Lily said quietly. Her name is Jean and her husband is Richard. They had a daughter. They thought they'd lost their daughter in the incident. The ministry has records from the investigation. They were told it was a magical accident and their daughter was. She stopped. The official record says their daughter died. But I didn't. No, the kitchen was very still. Outside the window the garden was in evening shadow, the climbing rose doing its thing against the fence. Harry had gone completely still in the specific way he did when something important was happening, and he'd decided his only contribution was to be present. James very quietly. We found them. Your mum this year, she found them. They live in London. They have a dental practice in Hampstead. They never had other children. Hermione looked at the table. Jean Granger is she reads, Lily said. A lot. Her husband jokes about it. She sat up for 2 nights when their daughter disappeared and read everything she could find about magical accidents. A pause. She sounds, from what we've found, like she never entirely let go of looking. She was reading in the dream, Hermione said. The memory, she was sitting in a chair reading and she didn't see me. She looked up, because I wasn't there anymore. No, she doesn't know I'm alive. No, she sat with that for a moment, the shape of it. She thought about Jean Granger sitting in a chair reading in a house in London not knowing. She thought about what that was to carry for 11 years. She thought about her mother, Lily, her mother, finding these people and spending 2 years trying to figure out how to tell her daughter, which was an act of love so complicated and costly that she couldn't look at it directly yet. I want to meet them, she said. Lily exhaled. I know. Not instead, not as a replacement. I want to meet them because Jean Granger has been not knowing for 11 years and that's not right. She should know. She looked at Lily steadily. And I want to understand who I would have been, not because it matters more than who I am, but because it's true and I don't ignore things that are true. James made a sound that was not quite a laugh and not quite something else. I know, Lily said. We'll help. We'll work it out together. Okay, Hermione said, then, because she was who she was and she'd been holding this for 8 months and it was out now and her chest felt like something had been released from it. Can I be excused? Of course, Lily said. She went upstairs. She sat on her bedroom floor, not the bed, the floor, with her back against the wall, and she thought about a ceiling and a woman reading and the smell of something clean and something warm and the very first memory she could actually place, which was not the white ceiling or the chemical smell but the feeling of something pulling, a warmth that had reached through a gap in the world and called to her, and she had gone toward it because it was warm and it was her. She put her face in her hands. She was not crying either. She was just holding the size of it, the particular size of being a person whose origins were genuinely extraordinary and who had to find a way to live with that didn't make it the biggest thing about her. Harry knocked on the doorframe. He sat on the floor beside her without being asked. They stayed there for a while. Lot to process, he said eventually. Yes, how are you? I don't know yet. A pause. I'm okay. Think I'm okay? I just needed a moment. Take as many as you want. She leaned her head back against the wall. The mirror showed me myself, she said. Exactly where I was standing. I'd expected it to show me another family or answers or something I was missing. What does that mean? It means my deepest desires to be exactly here, she said. It means even underneath everything I hadn't worked out yet I already knew. Harry was quiet. The mirror's smart, he said. Smarter than most things we encountered this year. High bar, she almost smiled. The magical community event happened on a Wednesday in mid-July. An annual gathering in the village of Ottery St. Catchpole that the Weasley family had apparently been hosting in some capacity, since Arthur Weasley had taken it upon himself to organize the local magical community's midsummer celebration, which had since grown from a small garden party into something requiring a substantial anti-muggle charm perimeter and a catering arrangement with 3 separate vendors. The twins arrived with James and Lily, and Ron was immediately there, pulling Harry toward a makeshift Quidditch demonstration in the far paddock, and Hermione found Neville sitting under a large oak tree with his grandmother, Augusta Longbottom, who was wearing a hat with a stuffed vulture on it, and surveying the event with the expression of a woman who had attended enough of these to have formed strong opinions. "Miss Potter," Augusta said. She said it the way she said everything, declaratively, like a woman laying down a fact. "Mrs. Longbottom." Hermione sat beside Neville, who was eating a sandwich and clearly relieved to have company. "How are you? Busy?" "There's been unusual magical activity in the Devon area. 3 separate reports of unexplained phenomena that don't match any registered magical event." She looked at Hermione with the sharp eyes that Neville had clearly gotten from somewhere. "You're the Potter girl who built the original countercurse. Who told you? Albus Dumbledore writes me occasionally. He mentioned it obliquely. He's always oblique about things that concern him." She studied Hermione. "It concerned him, which is interesting." Hermione filed that. "The magical phenomena in Devon," she said. "Can you describe them?" Augusta looked at her for a moment. "Then 3 properties, agricultural, 1 residential. A Muggle family reported their barn materials rearranging themselves overnight. A wizard farming family reported their livestock behaving as though under fear enchantment with no traceable source. And a young girl, magical, not yet Hogwarts age, has been having episodes of automatic writing she can't control." "Automatic writing," Hermione said. "Writing things she doesn't know the meaning of in a hand that isn't hers." Hermione went very still. "When did the episode start?" she asked. 6 weeks ago, she found an old diary in a second-hand shop in Exeter. She was already on her feet. The girl was Ginny Weasley, and she was 10 years old, and she was sitting in the Weasley kitchen when Hermione found her, with Ron's mother on one side and her father on the other, and a look on her face that Hermione recognized immediately, the look of someone who was frightened of themselves. The diary was on the kitchen table. Small, black, with a hole through the middle that looked like it had been made by something sharply corrosive. Hermione looked at it from across the room. "Don't touch it," she said. Molly Weasley looked at her. "I'm sorry, dear. Who?" "Hermione Potter." She kept her eyes on the diary. "I need everyone to move away from that object." She looked at Ginny. "How long ago did you last write in it?" Ginny swallowed. She was small and red-haired and determined in the way all Weasleys appeared to be determined, even frightened. "Last night, the writing came back. It said—" She stopped. "It's okay," Hermione said. "What did it say?" "It said I've been waiting for you, and then it said my name." Hermione moved to the table. She stood close enough to look at the diary without touching it, and she focused her attention on its magical signature the way she'd learned to focus on quirls, looking for the doubled quality, the resonance of something layered over something else. She found it immediately, worse than quirl, older, more deliberate. "Mrs. Weasley," she said very carefully, "do you have a fireproof container, metal preferably with a lid?" Molly appeared from a cupboard with a cast-iron casserole pot in under 4 seconds, which said something useful about her. Hermione took it. "Everyone out of the kitchen," she said. "Now wait a minute," Arthur Weasley began. "I understand that I'm 12 and this is your kitchen," Hermione said, "and I will explain everything in full detail the moment I've secured the object. But right now it needs to go in this container, and the room needs to be clear because the object is not just an object. It is a piece of a dark wizard's soul, and I need to separate it from the girl who has been writing in it before it has enough of an anchor in her to resist containment. Please." Silence. She looked at Ginny. "You'll be okay," she said. "I need about 2 minutes." Ginny looked at her. Then she stood up and walked out of the kitchen, and Molly followed, and Arthur looked at Hermione for one more moment with the assessing eyes of a man who worked with magical artifacts and knew when he was looking at someone who understood what they were saying. He left. She turned to the diary. The magic in it was like a voice heard through a wall, present, directed, aware of being looked at. She had read everything she could find about Horcruxes in Lily's library, and the information was sparse and consistently alarming. And she had been sitting on the word Horcrux in her notebook margin since October, and this was confirmation that she wished she didn't have. She said, "I know what you are." The diary sat on the table. "I know what he did to make you," she said. "And I know what you've been trying to do to Ginny Weasley. And I know that whatever you contain is a fragment of something that was never supposed to exist, and I am going to put you in this container, and I am going to make sure that you never interact with another living person again." She picked it up with 2 fingers at its very corner, dropped it into the casserole pot, and put the lid on. The pot shuddered once. She put both hands on it and cast a containment seal around the lid, the strongest one she had, layered 3 times with the rune for severance at the center, and the pot went still. She stood in the kitchen for a moment with her hands on a sealed casserole pot containing a piece of Voldemort's soul and thought, there are more. She had known this was likely since October. The chapter in Lily's library, the theoretical reasoning. Voldemort had made not just this one but multiple, how many she didn't know, but the architecture of this kind of magic was not efficient at one instance, and this was a man who had been afraid of death since he was old enough to understand the word. She needed Lily, she needed the archive, she needed everything in Lily's private library that touched on soul magic, and she needed it before the summer was over. She picked up the casserole pot and walked out of the kitchen. James heard the full account that evening in the Weasley sitting room with Arthur Weasley and Lily, and the Weasley house was very quiet for a sitting room that normally operated at Weasley volume. A Horcrux, Lily said. Yes, you're certain. The signature is specific. I've been reading about it since October. She put the pot on the table. Mum, there are more. Lily looked at the pot, then at Hermione, then at James. James's jaw was set in the way it got when he was angry about something he couldn't immediately act on. How many more? I don't know. The theory doesn't specify a number, but the magic required it would have taken planning and time, and a person who thought this way, who thought in contingencies, in redundancies, wouldn't make just one. She looked at her mother. Can I have full access to the archive? Yes, Lily said without hesitating. The soul magic chapter, everything. Yes. Arthur Weasley was looking between them with the expression of a man rapidly updating his understanding of what a 12-year-old was. The diary, he said carefully, came from Borgin and Burke's. Ginny found it in a second-hand shop, but second-hand shops in the magical world, things come through channels, someone may have placed it. Lucius Malfoy, Hermione said. Everyone looked at her. He uses Borgin and Burke's. He had the diary and needed to place it somewhere, either to see if it would work or to activate it or both. Ginny would have been a tool. The word was hard and she said it clearly because Ginny deserved to have the reality named. She would have been used and discarded and the diary would have moved on. That's a very specific accusation, Arthur said. I know I don't have proof, I have reasoning. She looked at him. But when you have the opportunity to look, I'd look at what else the Malfoy family has in their possession. Arthur Weasley was quiet for a long moment with an expression that was doing several things at once. The professional wariness of a ministry employee, the parental fury of a father whose daughter had been targeted, and something else, something that looked like a man making a decision. Right, he said. Lily reached across the table and touched Hermione's hand. Not dramatically, just briefly, the way she did the important things with economy. Hermione turned her hand over and held it. How did you know to come find it? Lily asked. Augusta Longbottom told me about the symptoms, automatic writing that the subject couldn't control, writing in a hand that wasn't theirs. She looked at the pot. Once I knew what I was looking for, the signature was obvious. A pause. I'm glad we were at the event. If we hadn't been, we were, James said. Firmly, we were there. She nodded. Harry came home that night full of Quidditch impressions and half-eaten food and the specific cheerfulness of a boy who had spent a day with the Weasleys, which was, he said, like being inside a very warm, very loud, very functional chaos engine. He sat on the back step and she sat beside him and she told him about the diary. His face went through several things, settled on the one it always settled on when information was serious. How many? He said. I don't know yet, more than one. He was quiet. The garden was dark around them, the gnomes asleep or pretending to be. The climbing rose a soft mass against the fence. The sky had the particular density of a very good summer night. Last year the stone, he said. This year a soul fragment. Yes, he's been planning this for a very long time. Decades, she said, since before we were born. Then we need to plan for a long time too. I know. Tell me what you need from me. She thought about it. Mum's archive, full access. I'm going to go through it and I need you to help me organize what we find. You're better at seeing connections between things that look unrelated. Okay, and I need you to not do anything about Quirrell or the stone or any of it until we understand the full picture. Quirrell is, he's not going to be a problem again. Voldemort is when he comes back, and he will come back. She looked at her brother. Whatever body he uses next, he'll be stronger than he was in Quirrell because he'll have had time to plan instead of improvise. We need to be ready. We'll be ready. She looked at him, this boy, her brother, who had put his hands up at a wraith and meant it. I know, she said. A letter arrived the following morning. It came with a Muggle stamp rather than an owl, forwarded via Gringotts Muggle Liaison Service, which Lily had set up 3 months ago in case it was ever needed. The envelope was cream-colored and the handwriting on it was neat and careful and unfamiliar. It was addressed to Hermione Potter and it came from Hampstead, London. She sat at the kitchen table with it in her hands for a long moment. The house was quiet. Harry was in the garden, James in his office, Lily not yet downstairs. She turned the envelope over. The return address, printed small on the back flap, said J&R Granger, Dental Surgery and Residence. The stamp had been carefully placed. The handwriting on the envelope was the handwriting of someone who had picked up the pen and put it down several times. She opened it. Dear Hermione, it began. I don't know if this will reach you. I don't know if you're old enough to read this or if you'll want to. I don't know very much at all, which has been the difficulty for 11 years. I know that you were once in a house in Somerset on the night of October 31st, 1981, and then you weren't. I know that a man from the ministry, a very patient man with half-moon spectacles, came to see us in the spring of this year and told us that you were alive and well and that you had a family who loved you. I have written this letter 27 times. This is the 28th. I'm not asking for anything back. I understand that you have a life and a family and I don't have any claim on that. I just needed to. A mother needs to know. Do you understand? I just needed to know. If you ever want to meet, we'll be here. We're always here. With all my love, Jean. She read it twice. Then she put it on the table in front of her and looked at it for a long time. Lily came into the kitchen and saw the letter and stopped in the doorway. She wrote first, Hermione said. Lily sat down across from her. Her face was very carefully arranged. Dumbledore told her, Hermione said. This year, the man with half-moon spectacles. She looked up. You asked him to. I did, Lily said. You could have told me before the letter arrived. I know, I was afraid. Hermione looked at her mother, at this woman who had done a piece of magic so enormous and so costly that it had accidentally remade the shape of two families, and who had spent 11 years doing the work of motherhood so completely that the shape of herself had long since incorporated it, and who was now sitting across a kitchen table with the fear of a woman who knew that love didn't make things uncomplicated. I'm going to write back, Hermione said, and eventually I'll want to meet her. I don't know when, but I will. Okay, Lily said, and I'm still yours, she said, completely, absolutely, that part isn't, this isn't instead, Mum. Lily pressed her lips together. She was definitely not crying. She was simply experiencing some difficulty with her eyes. I know, she said. Good. Hermione folded the letter carefully. Now, can I have the archive? Lily made a sound that was a laugh and something else in equal proportion. She pressed the back of her hand against her eyes briefly, and then she stood up, and she was Lily Potter again, composed, bright, formidable, and she said, come with me. They went to the library together, mother and daughter, and Lily pulled the archive down from its shelf and opened it to the beginning and said, ask me anything. The summer sun came through the library window and fell across the pages, and Hermione sat down and started to read. Chapter 6, The Air and the Echo. The Chamber of Secrets announced itself the way all serious things did, not all at once, but in accumulation. It started in September with the cats. Mrs. Norris first, found stiff and glassy-eyed on the second floor on the night of the death day party that nearly headless Nick had thrown, and which the twins had attended out of a combination of curiosity and social commitment to Gryffindor ghost relations. Then a Hufflepuff second year named Justin, petrified mid-stride between the library and his dormitory, his bag of books scattered on the floor in a fan pattern suggesting no warning, no time to turn around. Then Colin Creevey, who had spent September following Harry around with a camera and the devotion of someone who had decided to document a historical figure in real time, and who was found outside the second-floor girls' bathroom with his camera melted and his eyes fixed and empty. The school went taut with it. The particular tension of a community that has decided to be afraid but hasn't quite decided what to do about being afraid, whisper networks in corridors, older students moving in groups, the Slytherin contingent openly watching Harry at meals with calculating attention that ranged from suspicious to outright accusing. Draco Malfoy had said you'll be next, mudbloods the night Mrs. Norris was found, in front of 40 witnesses, and had then apparently gone back to his dormitory and reconsidered this, because for the following 2 weeks he had been uncharacteristically quiet. He watched the twins the same way the rest of Slytherin watched them, but his watch had a different quality. He was trying to figure something out rather than trying to intimidate. Hermione had noted this distinction. She'd noted most things, working through the evidence the same way she'd worked through the Philosopher's Stone evidence, systematically, without rushing toward a conclusion before the structure supported it. The structure was supporting it by mid-November. She put the notes on Harry's bed on a Tuesday evening when the dormitory was empty and let him read them in order. He sat with his elbows on his knees and read without interrupting, which was one of his better qualities. She watched his face process the sequence, the chamber's history, Salazar Slytherin's recorded ideology, the creature that Parseltongue tradition described as a weapon of purification, the plumbing architecture of a 1,000-year-old castle and where the main water arteries ran, the specific nature of the petrification and what caused it versus what killed. Basilisk, he said when he reached the relevant page. Basilisk, she confirmed. Reflected sight petrifies, direct sight kills. Justin saw it in water reflection. Colin saw it through his camera lens. Mrs. Norris saw it reflected in the flooded floor. She pointed at the last page of notes. The chamber entrance is in the second-floor girls' bathroom, Moaning Myrtle's bathroom. Harry looked up. Myrtle died in there 60 years ago, the last time the chamber was opened. She sat across from him. Tom Riddle opened it then. He was a student here, a Parselmouth head boy, Dumbledore's favorite. He framed a student named Hagrid and the chamber closed. She looked at Harry. Tom Riddle is Voldemort. Yeah, Harry said slowly. I worked that out about 2 pages in. The diary, she said. The diary was his, a younger version of him preserved in a soul fragment. He looked at her steadily. And whoever opened the chamber this time is connected to the diary. Ginny, she said. The word was careful, not entirely voluntarily. The diary was designed to influence. It was parasitic. It worked through trust and connection and gradual occupation. But the diary is gone now, which means whoever opened the chamber this time either opened it before the diary was secured, or the diary created a trigger before you contained it, Harry said, something already set in motion. She had been thinking about this for 6 weeks. The chamber opens through Parseltongue. The entrance responds to a speaker. The diary, she stopped, rearranged it. If the diary had enough influence over Ginny before I contained it, it could have compelled her to speak the command. Once the chamber is opened, the basilisk operates on its own. It doesn't need ongoing instruction. Harry was quiet. She's 10, Hermione said. She's Ron's sister. Whatever happened to her was done to her, not by her. I know. I'm saying it out loud so we're both clear about that before we go down there. He looked at her. When are we going? Soon. Before anyone else gets hurt. She picked up the notes and folded them with the practiced precision of someone who had organized important information enough times to have a system. But I need a week. I've been developing something for the basilisk. The eyes, he said. The eyes, we can't fight it blind. We'd have no spatial awareness and it moves fast. I've been building a reflective charm that coats a surface with a kind of magical mirror effect that— Hermione, she stopped. I can hear it, he said. She blinked. What, Parseltongue? He said it carefully, like he was explaining something he still found strange about himself. I've been hearing something in the walls since October, not words I understand, not speech exactly, more like a vibration, something old and angry. He looked at the floor. It's getting louder. She sat with that. You can track it. I think so. Can you hear where it goes? Up and down, mostly down. He looked up. I think the pipes run under the whole castle. Whatever's in the chamber, it's been moving through the plumbing. She added this to the notes. 1 week, she said. Don't go alone. Obviously, I mean it, Harry. I know you mean it. Good. She spent the week in the library and the bathroom on the second floor and 3 separate sessions in her dormitory with her wand and various pieces of polished metal and a lot of concentrated intent. The reflective charm she'd been developing was based on a principle she'd found in a 14th century text on magical creature handling, not a standard text, not something on any Hogwarts reading list, about an Albanian wizard who had dealt with basilisk infestations by training himself to see the world in reflection, to navigate by indirect sight until it became as natural as direct. She couldn't replicate that in a week. She could build something close. The charm coated surfaces with a semi-opaque reflective layer, preserving peripheral vision in reflection while blocking direct forward sight. She tested it on a mirror and then on her own wand held at arm's length, and the quality of the reflected image was good, not perfect, but workable. She tested it on Harry on day 5. He moved through the dormitory backwards and sideways with his reflected vision for 30 minutes without hitting anything significant, and then he stopped and said, I can work with this. It'll reduce your reaction time by about 15%, she said. You'll compensate, your spatial processing is— I know, he said, not arrogantly, just accurately. She taught it to Ron on day 6. Ron's spatial processing under pressure was good. Chess had given him an unusual ability to track multiple moving objects simultaneously, and he adapted quickly, though his backwards walking was less elegant than Harry's. We're still going, Ron said when she finished the lesson. It wasn't a question. Obviously, she said, just checking. He sat down on a dormitory chair and looked at her with the direct, unpretentious attention that was his most underrated quality. Are you scared? She thought about the diary shuddering in the casserole pot, about Tom Riddle's voice saying I've been waiting for you, about a basilisk that had already petrified 4 people and was getting bolder. Yes, she said. Good, he said. Means you're taking it seriously. She looked at him. My dad says anyone who isn't scared of a basilisk is an idiot, he said. He's dealt with 2, well, he dealt with 1 and ran from the second, but he says the running was a strategic decision. Despite everything, she almost smiled. Your family, she said, is very good people. Yeah, he said with the comfortable certainty of someone who had never had reason to think otherwise. They are. Neville on day 7 appeared at breakfast with the expression he got when he'd decided something and wasn't going to be talked out of it. He sat down across from Hermione and said, I'm going. Neville, I've been going to every dangerous thing since the stone, he said. I'm not stopping now. He looked at her steadily. He had the quality his grandmother had in his eyes when he looked like this, the declarative quality. I know I'm not as strong as you or Harry. I know my spellwork is inconsistent under pressure and I panic the first 10 seconds of a crisis. But the second 10 seconds I'm fine and I've been practicing. She looked at him. He had, she knew, been practicing. She'd seen him in the empty classroom off the 3rd floor where she sometimes worked late, seen him casting the same charm 50 times in a row with the patient, grinding repetition of someone who was not naturally gifted and had decided that didn't matter. You know what we're facing, she said. Basilisk, giant snake, kills with direct eye contact. You've built a reflective charm. He met her eyes. I'm going. She was quiet for a moment. You're going, she said. He nodded. Ate his toast like the matter was settled. It was. They went down on a Thursday night the week before December break when the castle was quiet and the second petrification victim, a ghost, ironically, which had confused everyone including the basilisk, which had apparently looked the ghost directly in the eyes and achieved nothing because there was nothing left to petrify, had added enough urgency to the situation that waiting felt worse than going. Myrtle's bathroom was cold and wet, which it always was, and Myrtle herself was in residence, sitting on the rim of one of the sinks with her translucent arms folded and the expression of someone who had been inconvenienced for 60 years and was past caring. Chamber entrance, Harry said. The sink, she said, the one with the small snake on the tap. She looked at him with the attention she always gave him, which was more than was comfortable. You're going down there? Yes. People have died down there. We're going anyway. She looked at him for a long moment, then she said quite quietly, be careful, I'd hate to have more company. Harry looked at her with something genuine. Thanks, Myrtle. He spoke to the sink in Parseltongue. Hermione heard it, not words, not anything she could parse, but the sound of it, which was less like speech and more like water over smooth stone, syllables that had been designed for a wider throat than a human one. It was eerie and specific and completely his, and she had heard it before in the walls when they were working late near the pipes and hadn't told him because she was still working out how she felt about it. The sink moved, the floor opened, a black pipe, Long, steep, the darkness of it absolute. Harry went first, then Ron, then Neville, then Hermione. They slid in the dark for several seconds, and then the floor arrived, stone solid, dusty with decades of disuse, and they were standing in a tunnel that smelled of damp and age and something else underneath, something cold and organic. Light, she said, and 4 wands came up simultaneously. The tunnel stretched ahead of them, flanked by carved stone serpents with emerald eyes that caught the wand light and returned it cold. The ceiling was low enough to feel intentional, and the floor was slightly uneven in a way that suggested it had been shaped rather than built. It went on for a long time. They moved quickly. Harry tracked the sound in the walls, the vibration he'd described, the old angry thing, and they followed it. Left, he said, at a junction. They went left. The door at the end was enormous and serpent-covered and sealed with parcel tongue again, and Harry spoke it open without hesitating, and the door split down the middle and they were through. Tom Riddle was standing in the center of the chamber. Not the diary, not the physical object, which was sealed in a containment ward in Hermione's trunk, but a manifestation built from something running on something, and she looked at it with the immediate analytical attention of someone assessing a threat and understood in the first 3 seconds that the diary had left a residual impression. Not the soul fragment itself, she'd contained that, but a memory echo, a projection, sustained by the chamber's own deep magic reacting to a Parselmouth's presence. Not a Horcrux, an echo, she almost laughed at the word of all the words. Tom Riddle looked like what he was, a 16-year-old who had already decided what kind of person he intended to become and had arranged his face accordingly. Dark-haired, handsome in the arranged way, with eyes that were cold and old behind the young features, he looked at Harry. "Harry Potter," he said, "I've been waiting." "Everyone says that," Harry said. "It still doesn't get less unsettling." Riddle's eyes moved to Hermione. The arranged handsomeness tightened. "You," he said. "Me," she agreed. "You took the diary." "I contained the diary," she said. "There's a distinction. It was mine. It was a piece of your soul that you tore off and trapped in an object to make yourself immortal," she said. "It was also a tool you were using to possess a 10-year-old girl. So no, it wasn't yours in any way that I'm inclined to respect." Something moved in Riddle's face. Not the controlled blankness, it had been something younger. Fury, almost. The fury of someone who had always been able to manipulate and was encountering something that couldn't be manipulated. "You're the echo," he said. "I read about you in the diary, the girl who isn't supposed to exist, the magical accident." "I'm Hermione Potter," she said. "Everything else is details." The basilisk came from the right. She had felt it, not heard it, but felt it in the floor, the deep muscular movement of something enormous moving through stone-adjacent space, and she had the reflective charm up before she consciously decided to, the world pivoting into its reflected version with the disorienting smoothness she'd practiced for a week. The others went reflective simultaneously. She drilled them enough. In reflection, the basilisk was 60 feet of yellow-eyed, scale-armored, impossible creature, and even in reflection its presence was a physical force, the heat of it, the weight of it, the sound of it moving, which was less like a snake than like a building deciding to rearrange itself. Harry had a sword, not metaphorically, not mysteriously. He had a sword because James Potter had kept one in the library since Harry was 8, and had taught both his children to use it on the grounds that magical history was full of moments when a sword was exactly what was required. And when Harry had asked which sword should I bring to the Chamber of Secrets 3 hours ago, Hermione had said the one with the best balance without pausing. He moved toward the basilisk in reflection with the particular quality he had in physical confrontation, the stillness that was not stillness, the calm that was not calm but something underneath it, something that had decided. Ron went left. Neville went right. They cast simultaneously, not at the snake which their charms would scratch, but at the stone columns flanking the chamber, blasting hexes that brought fragments of carved serpent raining down, and the noise and the movement of it gave Harry a second. He used the second. She watched him move in reflection, the world halved and reversed but clear enough, and thought, "He's the best physical magical combatant I have ever seen, including James, and James would agree." The sword went in behind the jaw, not the head was armored, the scales overlapping, but the joint behind the jaw where the armor was thinner, and the angle was right if you had the reflected spatial awareness to find it, and the absolute commitment to go there without hesitating. The basilisk made a sound that was less a sound than a pressure wave. It thrashed. Harry went with the thrash rather than against it, let it carry him clear, and landed in a roll that brought him back to his feet 10 meters from the creature's body. Riddle screamed, not in pain, in fury, the fury of a plan collapsing. Hermione turned her attention to him. "The chamber is closing," she said. "Whatever is sustaining your projection here, it was the basilisk, wasn't it? The chamber's guardian as the anchor point. It dies, you dissipate." "You don't know that," he said. "I do know that. I've been researching soul magic for 8 months. She raised her wand. "I know what you are, and I know what you're made of, and I know every weakness of every form of magic you used to build yourself. So you can try to stop me, or you can dissipate now, and we can agree that this was a productive learning experience for all involved." "You sound like Dumbledore," he said. "That's the most flattering thing you've said." He raised his hand. She cast. Not an attack spell. She didn't have an attack spell for a projection. Projections weren't physical entities. You couldn't hurt a memory. She cast the rune sequence she developed over a week specifically for this, the dissolution rune, the one that said you are not permanent, you are not anchored, you were never meant to be here, come apart, and she cast it in 3 layers overlapping the way you hammered a stuck door. The first layer made Riddle flicker, the second made him translucent, the third made him stare at her with something she hadn't expected and would think about for a long time, recognition, not of her specifically but of what she was doing, the look of someone encountering a problem they hadn't anticipated from a direction they hadn't considered. You're going to be more trouble than he is, he said, looking at Harry. We're going to be trouble together, she said. That's significantly worse for you. He dissipated, not dramatically, not with a scream or a flash of dark energy. He just came apart, the projection losing cohesion, the structured memory dissolving at the edges first and then the center, the image of a 16-year-old who had decided to become something else fading in the green torchlight of the chamber until there was nothing left of him but the smell of old magic and the echo of his own voice. The chamber went quiet, the basilisk lay still, the stone serpent stared at nothing. The torches guttered and then steadied. Harry stood in the center of it with the sword in his hand and a tear in his sleeve where one of the thrashing scales had caught him, and he looked at her with the expression he got when something had been decided. Are you hurt? She said. Fine. He looked at the sword. I think Mum's going to say something about the sword. She's going to say a lot of things, Hermione agreed, most of them loudly. The tooth, Ron said. They looked at him. He was standing near the basilisk's head, at a careful distance, the reflective charm still technically up though they'd all dropped their eyes pointing at something. A fang. One of the basilisk's fangs 3 inches long and still potent, lying on the chamber floor where the jaw had struck stone during the thrashing. She looked at it. She thought about the diary in its casserole pot. She thought about there are more. She thought about the research in Lily's archive and the Horcrux theory, and the specific destructive capability of basilisk venom, which was one of the most corrosive magical substances known, and one of the very few things capable of irreparably destroying a soul fragment housed in an object. She took the fang. Carefully wrapped in the rune-inscribed cloth she'd brought because she'd thought about this already 3 days ago, lying in bed looking at the ceiling and thinking what if we need to destroy it on the other side, and she'd packed the cloth because that was who she was. The diary, she said. Harry understood immediately. You'll destroy it. Not tonight. I need to set up the warding properly and I want Mum to see it first. She pocketed the wrapped fang. But yes. Neville, who had been standing guard near the chamber entrance with the steady calm of someone who had been frightened for the first 10 seconds and fine for the rest, said, Can we go back up now? My legs are doing a thing. What thing? Harry said. A shaking thing. I think it's adrenaline. Yeah, Ron said. Me too, actually. Harry rolled his wand in his fingers and looked around the chamber, at the carved serpents, the green torchlight, the enormous shape of the basilisk in the dimness, and then he looked up at the ceiling of the place that Salazar Slytherin had built to house something that would purify the school of everyone he deemed unworthy. Right, he said. Let's go. Dumbledore was waiting when they came up through the floor of Myrtle's bathroom, not just Dumbledore. McGonagall was there, and behind her Lily and James, and the specific quality of their presence, the speed of arrival, the fact of it, meant someone had sent a message. Myrtle, Hermione suspected. Myrtle had been in the bathroom for 60 years and had spent that time being underestimated, and she had apparently decided that these particular children were worth protecting. Lily reached Hermione in 3 steps and held her at arm's length for exactly 2 seconds, checking, the way trained charms researchers check things, with specific attention rather than just visual confirmation, and then she pulled her in and held her for longer than 2 seconds. James had Harry and was doing the same thing from a different angle, checking the tear in the sleeve first, and Harry was saying, It's fine, Dad, and James was saying, I'll decide that, in the voice he used when his children had done something terrifying and he was managing the terror by attending to the practical. McGonagall looked at Neville and Ron. You're both unhurt. Fine, they said in near unison. She nodded. She looked at the sword in Harry's hand. She looked at the sword for a long moment. James Potter's sword, she said. I should have known. It's a good sword, Harry said. It is, she said, with the expression of a woman choosing not to have a longer conversation about this right now. Dumbledore stood slightly apart and observed. His eyes moved over the 4 of them with the attention he gave things he was genuinely trying to understand, and there was something in it, not surprise because Dumbledore was rarely surprised, but something adjacent to it. Recalibration. The chamber, he said. Closed, Harry said. Permanently, I think the basilisk is dead. Tom Riddle's projection. Hermione looked at him. You knew there'd be a projection. I suspected, he said. The chamber's deep magic combined with a Parselmouth in the space, it was possible. I did not anticipate it would be manageable. We managed it, she said. Yes, he looked at her, the eyes doing that thing, and the diary's soul fragment still contained. Yes, and I have a way to destroy it. She touched the wrapped fang in her pocket without taking it out, but we need to talk about the others first. The corridor went quiet in the way it went quiet when something important was being said and everyone present understood it. Dumbledore looked at her for a long moment. Others, he said. I've been researching for 8 months, she said. I think there are multiple Horcruxes, I don't know exactly how many. I have theories about what they might be housed in, based on what I know of Voldemort's psychology and the objects with the highest magical resonance that were accessible to him before he fell. She looked at him steadily. "I'd like to share what I have." "Hermione," Lily said softly. "Mum. He needs to know, and I need to tell him, because if I don't tell him the right way, he'll spend the next several years deciding what information to give us and what to withhold. And I'd rather we start the way we intend to continue." She kept her eyes on Dumbledore. "You're good at secrets. You're good at long plans. I understand why. I've read enough about you to understand why. But whatever you're planning for Harry needs to include me, and it needs to include the full picture, because we're better with the full picture." "Hermione," James said, with a note in his voice that was somewhere between amusement and parental solidarity. "I know," she said to him, "but it's true." Dumbledore looked at her for a long time. Then he did the thing she hadn't quite expected. He smiled, not the warm, wise, performance of wisdom smile. A smaller one, private, the kind that happened when someone surprised him in a way he actually enjoyed. "Your mother," he said, "once told me something very similar when she was about your age, and she was right." He inclined his head. "I would very much like to hear what you found." They sat in McGonagall's office because it was close, and because McGonagall's office had the best chairs, and Hermione laid out 6 months of research on the desk, and Dumbledore listened with the quality of attention he gave things he considered genuinely important, complete, still, without interruption. When she finished, the office was quiet for a long moment. "7, he said. "You believe 7. 6 Horcruxes and the fragment that was already destroyed when the killing curse rebounded," she said. "6 remaining. I think the diary has been dealt with but needs formal destruction. The others, I have candidates. I'd need access to your records and to some information the Ministry holds about Voldemort's movements before his fall." "I will arrange it," he said. She nodded. "And Harry and I should be involved in the finding and the destroying. Not sent in blind and not kept out until it's convenient. Involved." "Hermione," Lily said again, but softer. "These are reasonable terms," Dumbledore said. "I accept them." Lily looked at him, then at her daughter, then at James, who was leaning against the wall with his arms folded and the expression of a man watching something inevitable arrive in good form. "She's 12, Lily said, to no one specific, to the room. She built an original possession counter curse at 11 and destroyed a soul fragment projection at 12, Dumbledore said. "Age has been consistently misleading as a metric." "I know that," Lily said. "I was one of hers." She looked at Hermione. "I just wanted to say it out loud that you're 12 and extraordinary, and I'm terrified and proud in equal proportion." "Terrified first," Harry said, "then proud." "That is always the order," James confirmed. Hermione looked around the room, at her parents, her brother Ron and Neville, who had gone through a chamber of death with her without being asked, at a very old wizard who was looking at her with the expression of someone updating an important plan, and she thought about the mirror and what it had shown her and why. She was exactly here. The letter to Jean Granger she wrote that night in the common room while everyone else slept, with the fire burned down to a low amber and the castle quiet around her. She had started it 6 times over the summer and not finished any of them. Tonight she wrote it in one sitting without stopping. She told Jean that she was alive and well and had a family who loved her completely. She told her about Hogwarts, not the chamber, not tonight, but Hogwarts as it actually was, the beauty of it, the moving staircases and the talking portraits, and the way the sky looked from the astronomy tower at midnight. She told her about Harry and about James and about Lily, and she was careful and honest in equal measure. She wrote, "I don't know exactly what we are to each other or what the right words are for it. I know that you've been not knowing for 11 years and that isn't right, and I want that to change. I'd like to meet you, whenever you're ready or whenever I am, probably both." She wrote, "I look like you apparently. My dad says so. I haven't seen a photograph yet, but I'm told the hair is familiar." She wrote, "I've had a good life. I want you to know that first and most. Whatever happened that night, however it happened, I've had a good life and I'm going to have a good life, and I don't want you to carry the version where that's uncertain." She signed it, Hermione Potter. She folded it. She addressed the envelope in her own handwriting, which was neat and precise and nothing like Jean Granger's careful hand on the envelope from Hampstead, which she had kept and read 7 times. She would post it in the morning. She sat with it in her hands for a moment longer. Outside the tower windows, the December sky was very clear and very dark, and the stars were doing what stars did over Scotland, which was everything at once with complete indifference. She thought about echoes. She thought about what it meant to be a resonance, not a copy, not an original, but a second vibration that happened because the first one was real enough to cause it. She thought about how the Sorting Hat had said you are not just a Potter by adoption and love, and she'd thought then by what? And now she knew, by magic, by sacrifice, by the deepest possible expression of a mother choosing her child before the choice was even a choice, in the dark, in the ruins of something that had tried to end them all. She thought about Voldemort saying, "I will tell you where you came from," and how she'd said, "I know what I am." She had meant it then as defiance. She meant it now as something true. She was an echo of a sacrificial spell so powerful it had rewritten the fabric of cause and effect, had reached through the gap between one world and another and found a child whose magic resonated at exactly the right frequency, had carried her home. She was the daughter of Lily Potter, who had built a counter-curse for possession at 11 because there was a problem and she had a library. She was the sister of Harry Potter, who put his hands up at a wraith because it seemed like the right move. She was the girl in Myrtle's bathroom who had gone through the floor because someone needed to. She was also possibly the girl in a house in Hampstead whose hair matched Jean Granger's, and that was true too. All of it true simultaneously, none of it cancelling anything else out. She put the letter in her bag. She went to bed. The fire burned down to nothing, and the common room went dark, and the castle breathed around her in the slow, enormous way it breathed when the children were sleeping and the night was its own. And somewhere in Hogwarts a door that had been sealed for 60 years was sealed again. And somewhere in London a woman named Jean Granger was awake at 2 in the morning reading, the way she always was, in the chair by the window. And on a desk in Dumbledore's office, half covered by a stack of student records, were 6 pages of notes in a 12-year-old's precise handwriting, detailing every Horcrux she believed existed, the reasoning behind each identification, and a proposed methodology for destroying them. In the margin of the last page, in his own hand, Dumbledore had written one word: remarkable.